The engines died one by one, like soldiers falling in formation. Outside the Crow's Rest Diner on Highway 9, the Iron Covenant Motorcycle Club materialized from the autumn dark. 14 Harleys rolling in slow and deliberate beneath a neon sign that buzzed and flickered like something dying. Ronan Voss led them, as he always did, his scarred face unreadable beneath the cold October air. Beside his bike, on a heavy chain that no one else ever held, walked Brutus, 140 pounds of battered bulldog, with a history that made grown men step backward without knowing why. The diner went quiet. A trucker put down his coffee. A waitress pressed herself against the counter. Even the cook stopped moving behind the window. Then a 7-year-old girl in a yellow raincoat walked straight toward the dog. No one breathed. Leather creaked. Someone whispered, "Don't," and then stopped, because Brutus had already lowered his enormous, scarred head directly into the child's small hands. The entire brotherhood stood frozen. Not one of them had ever touched that dog without consequence. Not even Ronan. If you've ever witnessed the moment a broken creature finally chooses to trust, stay with this story. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from tonight. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because nothing about this night was an accident. The Crow's Rest had been dying for years. You could see it in the parking lot. Cracked asphalt heaved up by frost and neglect, the yellow lines faded to ghosts, a payphone standing in the corner with its receiver missing. The sign above the door advertised pie and coffee in letters that had once been red, now the color of old rust. Highway 9 ran past it like a river that had forgotten this particular bank existed. Trucks blowing through without slowing, their headlights sweeping the windows and moving on. Inside, the booths were patched with electrical tape. The jukebox in the corner had been broken since March, and nobody had bothered to call about it. Eloise Garner, the night shift waitress, had worked the Crow's Rest for 11 years. She knew every crack in the ceiling above booth 4. She knew the sound the furnace made when the temperature outside dropped below 40, a low, grinding moan like something in pain. She knew that the trucker who always ordered the Western omelet tipped exactly $1, regardless of the total, and she had stopped resenting him for it somewhere around year 3. She poured coffee, she smiled when smiling was required, and she went home to a studio apartment above a laundromat in Millhaven, and she did not think too hard about any of it. Tonight she was thinking hard. The old man had come in around 7:30, 70, maybe older, with the careful movements of someone whose joints had started filing complaints. He wore a canvas jacket too thin for October and carried a paper bag from a gas station 2 towns over. Behind him, holding his hand with both of hers, came the little girl. Eloise put them in booth 6, which was the warmest, closest to the kitchen wall. The girl climbed up onto the bench seat and sat with her knees folded under her, looking at everything with large, still eyes, the kind of eyes that had already learned not to ask for too much. She wore a yellow raincoat over a sweater that was slightly too big, the cuffs folded back twice. Her hair was dark and needed cutting. She didn't fidget. She didn't ask for crayons or a kid's menu. She just looked, quietly and carefully, at the room around her. "What can I get you?" Eloise said. The old man, he gave his name as Walt when she asked, Walter Rowan, said it like he was reading it off a document, ordered a grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup for the girl and a coffee for himself. He asked if the coffee was fresh. Eloise told him it had been sitting 40 minutes. He said that was fine. He didn't look like a man for whom fresh coffee was a priority anymore. She brought the food. The girl, Maisie, she caught it from the way Walt said her name once, quietly, when she reached for the salt, ate with focused, methodical attention, like someone who understood that meals were not guaranteed, not picking at it, not being difficult, just eating with a kind of quiet seriousness that had no business being on the face of a 7-year-old. Eloise refilled Walt's coffee without being asked. "Traveling far?" she said. "Far enough," he said. She didn't push. There was something in the way he held his mug, both hands wrapped around it like he was trying to absorb the warmth directly into his bones, that told her the question had a longer answer than either of them wanted to deal with tonight. She left them alone and went back to the counter and tried not to watch the way the old man looked at the little girl sometimes, when Maisie wasn't looking back, like he was doing math, like he was calculating how long he had and finding the number insufficient. The furnace groaned. Outside, the wind picked up, and then the motorcycles came. She heard them before she saw them, that unmistakable layered thunder of multiple Harleys running in formation, the sound building from somewhere down the highway and rolling toward the diner like weather. The trucker in the corner looked up. The couple in booth 2 stopped talking. Even Maisie went still, her spoon halfway to her mouth, her head tilted slightly as she listened. They pulled into the lot in a loose column, headlights cutting through the dark, and Eloise counted them through the window. 9, 11, 14 bikes, all of them heavy, American iron with the deep, rolling idle of engines that had been built for endurance. They rode without hurry. They parked without chaos. That was the thing about them that always unsettled people who didn't know the difference. The gangs in the movies were loud and erratic and showed you everything. These men showed you almost nothing, and somehow that was worse. She knew who they were. Everyone in a 50-mile radius of Millhaven knew the Iron Covenant. Not from wanted posters or news reports. Ronan Voss had kept his club off the front pages with a discipline that was almost military in its precision. You knew them from other things. From the way a bar fight would suddenly stop when 3 of them walked in and nobody could explain afterward why exactly. From the way certain people who had been causing problems in the county tended to quietly stop causing them. From the hardware store owner who had found an envelope of cash in his mailbox after the fire, no return address, and from the way he'd immediately understood not to ask questions about it. The door opened and cold air came in with the first of them. Not Ronan. Ronan came last. That was the thing she'd noticed the one other time the Covenant had stopped here, 2 summers ago. The president always came last through a door and first into anything dangerous. The men who entered ahead of him were large, quiet, road-worn. Denim cuts over leather jackets, patches she'd learned not to stare at. They took the long booth along the back wall and 2 of the smaller tables nearby without being asked, arranged themselves with an efficiency that spoke of long practice, and they were not loud. They ordered in brief, complete sentences. Please and thank you, both of which surprised people every time. Ronan came in last. He was not the biggest man in the room. That would have been the one they called Bishop, who had to turn slightly sideways through a standard door frame. But Ronan Voss had the particular quality of certain damaged things, the quality of a structure that has survived something catastrophic and been reinforced at the broken places until the breaks themselves became the strongest parts. He was 41. He moved like a man whose body held a detailed inventory of every injury it had ever sustained. A scar ran from his left jaw down to the collar of his jacket, old and pale, a long time healed but never invisible. His eyes were the color of February, a gray that was not cold exactly, but not warm either. Somewhere in between, somewhere unresolved. And beside him, on a chain that he held not tight but present, walked Brutus. The dog was enormous. That was the first thing, the sheer mass of him, the broad, battered skull, the chest that seemed to belong to a creature twice his height. He was a bulldog in the way that a tank is a vehicle. Technically accurate, but somehow insufficient as a description. He moved with a heavy, rocking gait, his low-slung body carrying old scars that Eloise could see even from behind the counter. Patches where fur had grown back thinner, places where something had left its mark, and the mark had stayed. His eyes were amber and very still. He did not look at the room the way most dogs looked at rooms. He looked at it the way soldiers look at territory. Nobody went near him. The trucker shifted his stool without making it obvious. Eloise found herself 2 steps to the right without quite deciding to move. The couple in booth 2 became very interested in their menus. Ronan led the dog to the space at the end of the long booth, looped the chain around the table leg once, not a restraint, more like a courtesy, a signal, and sat down without removing his jacket. He didn't look at the menu. When Eloise came over with her notepad, he said black coffee and whatever was hot, and she wrote it down and left without asking follow-up questions. She was behind the counter when she heard the small sound. Not a gasp, not a shout, just a kind of collective held breath. The entire room contracting at once, and she turned to see Maisie standing in the aisle between the booths. The girl had gotten down from booth 6 without either Eloise or Walt noticing. She was standing 8 feet from Brutus, her yellow raincoat bright as a signal flare in the dull light of the diner, and she was looking at the dog with an expression that Eloise had no immediate word for. Not fear, not the reckless fearlessness of a child who doesn't understand danger. Something else. Something quieter and older than either of those things. Walt had seen her. He was half out of his seat, his face tight with the specific terror of a man who knows he cannot move fast enough and knows it. Several of the bikers had gone very still. One of them, big man with a red beard, closest to the aisle, had his hand extended slightly in Maisie's direction, not quite reaching, a half gesture of someone who wants to intervene and doesn't dare make a sudden movement. Ronan's hand had closed around the chain. Brutus had turned his head. The dog looked at the girl. His amber eyes moved over her with the same slow, assessing attention he gave to everything. To threats, to changes in the weather, to the sound of an unfamiliar engine. The low sound in his chest that was always present, that constant vibration of contained warning, had gone quiet. Not silent. Quiet. There was a difference. Eloise had been around enough animals to know it, though she could not have explained it precisely. Maisie took one step forward. Every muscle in Ronan's forearm went rigid on the chain. The girl stopped. She didn't look afraid. She looked like she was waiting for something, listening for something that none of the rest of them could hear. Then she crouched down to the dog's eye level, her small knees touching the worn linoleum, and she said something. Too quiet for anyone else to make out. Not a command, not the bright performative tone that people used with animals when they wanted to show they weren't afraid. Something lower than that. Something that sounded, from a distance, almost like a question. Brutus took a step toward her. Nobody in that diner moved. Nobody breathed. The furnace had stopped its groaning. Even the highway outside seemed to have gone quiet, the trucks holding off by some unspoken agreement. The dog walked to the girl, 3 steps, slow, his big head swinging slightly with each one. And then he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could reach him. Close enough that if he decided differently, the outcome would be immediate and terrible. His amber eyes were on her face. The sound in his chest was completely gone. Maisie reached out her hand, palm up, the way you would offer something. Brutus lowered his head into her lap. The chain went slack in Ronan's hand. The red-bearded biker slowly lowered his arm. Someone at the back table exhaled. Walt Rowan sat back down in his seat and put both hands flat on the table and stared at nothing for a long moment. Eloise realized she had been pressing the edge of her notepad against her sternum hard enough to leave a mark. Maisie was looking at the dog's neck, not petting him in the distracted way children sometimes petted animals, a rhythmic, automatic motion that was more about the child's own comfort than the animal's. She was looking. Her small fingers moved through the fur at his neck and found something there, something that made her expression shift, and she looked up. Not at Ronan, not at the bikers, not at her grandfather. She looked at the room in general with those large, still eyes. "He's been hurt," she said. Not accusatory, just factual. No one answered her. Ronan was looking at his own hand, still loosely holding the chain, the slack of it pooled on the table like something shed. He had owned Brutus for 4 years. He had fed the dog, trained him to a degree that had taken longer and cost more than he wanted to admit, kept him safe from situations that would have ended badly. He had never, not once in 4 years, been able to touch the animal without a period of cautious negotiation. The dog tolerated him. That was the honest word for it. Tolerated, with a suspicion that never fully resolved into trust, the way a wound will heal to a scar, but the skin over it is never quite the same as what was there before. This child had been in the dog's presence for 45 seconds. "He's okay," Maisie said to the dog in that same low, matter-of-fact tone. "You're okay now." Brutus made a sound, not a growl, something lower and quieter than a growl, something that had no name in the vocabulary Ronan had built around this animal, something that sounded, if you were being honest, like exhaustion finally given permission. Walt was watching his granddaughter with an expression so complicated it was almost painful to look at. Love was in there, and pride and something that had no single word. A grief that was also a form of recognition, the specific grief of a man who has watched a child carry something no child should carry and cannot take it from her. Ronan stood up. He did it slowly, the way men do when they're not sure what their legs will do, and he walked to the end of the booth and stood looking down at the girl and the dog. Up close, the scar on his jaw was more visible. His eyes were that unresolved gray. He looked at Brutus, at the way the dog's breathing had changed, slower and deeper, at the way his enormous body had simply released some tension that had been present for 4 years. And then he looked at the girl. "What's your name?" he said. "Maisie." He said nothing for a moment. Eloise watched him from behind the counter and thought, without quite meaning to, that this was the most uncertain she had ever seen a man look, who was also, obviously, and without question, the most dangerous person in the room. "How did you know he wouldn't—" He stopped, reconsidered. "He doesn't let people near him." Maisie looked up at him with those large, patient eyes. "I know," she said. "I could tell." "Could tell what?" She looked back at the dog. Her hand was still moving through his fur in that deliberate, careful way. And she had found the scar tissue now. Ronan could see it from where he stood. The places along the dog's neck and shoulders where the coat was thinner, where the skin beneath had the particular texture of something that had gone through fire and come out the other side changed. "That he wasn't mean," Maisie said. "He was just scared. There's a difference." The furnace kicked back on. The jukebox stayed broken. Outside, a truck finally came through on Highway 9, its lights sweeping the windows and moving on, and the world resumed its usual motion. But something inside the Crow's Rest diner had shifted, quietly and permanently, the way ground shifts after water has found a new path through it. Ronan stood above the girl and the dog for another long moment. Then he looked across the diner at the old man in booth 6, at Walter Rowan with his gas station bag and his two-handed grip on a coffee mug and his careful, exhausted eyes. And something moved across Ronan's face. Not a question exactly, more like the precursor to a question. The moment before you realize you're going to ask something you're not prepared for the answer to. He walked to booth 6. He sat down across from Walt without being invited. Walt watched him come and didn't move. Not the stillness of fear, but the stillness of a man who has already run his calculations and reached some private conclusion about how this goes. "Where are you headed?" Ronan said. "North." "How far north?" Walt looked at him for a moment. Then he looked past him, at Maisie and Brutus, and the expression on his face was that same complicated thing. The love and the grief and the recognition all wound together into something that didn't fit neatly into any of the categories Ronan had built his life around. "Far as I can get," Walt said. "Before—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. Ronan waited. Outside, the wind found a gap somewhere in the diner's old frame, and a cold thread of air moved through the room, stirring napkins and lifting the edges of paper placemats, and the neon sign above the door buzzed and flickered like something uncertain whether to stay lit. "Before what?" Ronan said. Walt set down his coffee mug. He looked at Ronan Voss with the eyes of a man who has been carrying something alone for so long that the weight has become structural, part of how he stands, part of how he breathes. And in those eyes was something that made the hair on Ronan's arms rise beneath his jacket, something that made the careful, threat-assessing machinery of his mind shift from neutral into a gear he hadn't used in a while. Not danger, not the ordinary kind. The kind that doesn't come at you from the outside. "Before I can't anymore," Walt said quietly, and he did not look away. Across the diner, Maisie had her cheek resting against the top of Brutus's broad, scarred head, and the dog had not moved. And outside the wind was picking up, and somewhere behind Walt Rowan's carefully held expression was a story that Ronan could feel coming toward him the way you feel a storm. Before the rain, before the thunder, in the changed pressure of the air itself. He didn't know yet what it was, but he knew, with the certainty of a man who has spent his whole life reading situations that other people missed until it was too late, that whatever Walt Rowan was not yet saying had the power to change every single thing about tonight. Walt Rowan did not speak immediately. He had the manner of a man who had learned, through some long, costly education, that words released too quickly had a way of changing shape in the air, of arriving somewhere other than where they were aimed. So he held what he had to say for another moment, turning his coffee mug in slow circles on the table while Ronan waited across from him with the patience of someone who had sat in a lot of silences and learned which ones were worth breaking and which ones needed to run their course. Outside, the wind was moving harder now. It came off the flat Octoberland in long, sweeping passes that rocked the diner sign on its brackets and sent dead leaves skittering across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. The Harleys were out there in the cold, ticking as their engines cooled, 14 machines lined up in the dark like a question somebody had left unanswered. Her parents died in April, Walt said finally. He said it the way men say the things they've had to say too many times. Not flat, not without feeling, but worn into a shape that was easier to carry than the full, unworked grief. Like a stone that's been in a pocket long enough to take on the warmth and smoothness of constant handling. Ronan said nothing. Car accident, both of them. My son and his wife. Walt paused, set the mug down. Maisie wasn't in the car. She was with me that weekend. She'd been with me every weekend for about a month by then. He looked across the diner at the girl, who had not moved from her position on the floor beside Brutus, her cheek still resting against the dog's head, her eyes half closed. I think about that a lot. What the difference of one weekend means. Eloise had materialized at the table's edge with the coffee pot, silent and professional, and refilled Walt's mug without being asked, and removed herself again without a word. Ronan watched her go and then looked back at the old man. Who has custody? Ronan said. Walt's jaw moved, just slightly. That's the question, isn't it? It is. My daughter-in-law's sister, court awarded it in July. He wrapped both hands around the fresh coffee. The steam rose between his face and Ronan's. Woman named Karen Phelps. Lives in Garrick Falls, upstate. Maisie spent 6 weeks with her. He stopped. And Maisie called me from a neighbor's phone on a Tuesday night at 11 o'clock. His voice had changed on that last sentence. Not louder, but denser, like something compressed. Said she didn't want to tell me what was wrong because she knew I'd worry. 7 years old. Trying to protect me. Ronan was quiet. The machinery behind his eyes was running. I drove up there the next morning. Took her home with me. Walt finally looked directly at Ronan. His eyes were the pale, steady blue of a man who has made an irrevocable decision and is done arguing with himself about it. Karen called the police 2 days later. So, that's where we are. The room was doing what rooms do when something important has just been said in them, continuing indifferently. The trucker was paying his check. Eloise was wiping the counter. 2 of the Covenant men near the back were talking in low voices over their food. But in booth 6, the air had the particular density of a situation that has just become real in a new way. Where are you going? Ronan said. Not the same question as before. Specific now. I have a brother in Harlan County. He's got land. Enough of it to matter. Walt looked down at his coffee. I know what this looks like. I know what I'm doing has a name in the law. I'm not confused about any of that. But you're doing it anyway. She called me from a neighbor's phone at 11 o'clock at night, Walt said. Yeah, I'm doing it anyway. Ronan sat with that for a moment. In a different version of himself, the version that existed before certain places and certain years, he might have had a clear, uncomplicated response to this. Might have seen it as a legal matter with defined edges, but he had been in enough places where the law was a language nobody who was actually suffering could afford to speak that the edges had gotten complicated a long time ago. He looked across the diner at Maisie. The girl had shifted slightly. She wasn't asleep. Her eyes were open, that same large, considering gaze directed at something in the middle distance. But she was deeply still, in the way of a child whose nervous system has learned that stillness is a form of safety. Her hand was still moving in Brutus's fur, that slow, deliberate motion, and the dog's breathing had settled into something Ronan had never heard from him before. Long and even. Something close to peace. He looked back at Walt. How much of a head start do you have? Left Millhaven at 6. It's... Walt glanced at the clock above the counter. Past 9 now. Anyone know this route? My route? Walt's mouth turned briefly. I drove to Millhaven for 18 years. It's not a secret. Ronan looked at the table. Then he stood up, and without another word to Walt, he walked back to the long booth where his men were eating and sat down at the near end and leaned forward on his forearms. Bishop was to his left. Big, red-bearded, the man who'd reached toward Maisie earlier. To his right, a narrow, sharp-faced man named Cord, who had been with the club since the beginning and who had, over the years, developed the ability to tell what kind of conversation was coming by the angle of Ronan's shoulders. Cord looked at those shoulders now and put down his fork. What? He said. Old man in booth 6, Ronan said, voice low, not looking up from the table. He took his granddaughter out of a custody situation. They're heading north. A beat of silence. How bad is the custody situation? Cord said. Bad enough that the kid called him at 11 on a Tuesday. Another beat. Bishop had gone still in his peripheral vision. That's not our business, said a voice from further down the table. Reyes, compact, dark-eyed, the club's enforcer in the technical sense of the word, meaning the man you sent when a situation had progressed past the stage where conversation was sufficient. He had his coffee cup raised and his eyes on Ronan with an expression that was not quite challenge and not quite question, somewhere between. Old man makes his choices. Kid's a civilian. We've got the Harlan run Friday, and Decker's been calling about the Stanton contract since Tuesday. I know what we've got, Ronan said. Then you know we can't. I didn't say we were doing anything. Ronan looked at Reyes directly for the first time. I said who they were. The table went quiet in the specific way that happened when Ronan used that tone. Not raised, never raised, but with a quality of compression in it that communicated clearly and without elaboration that the sentence before it was the last word on the matter for now. Reyes set his cup down. Cord was looking at the booth across the diner. Kid did something with Brutus, he said. Yeah. I've never seen him do that. No, Ronan agreed. You haven't. He stood up and walked to the end of the booth, crouched down to Brutus's level. The dog turned his head and looked at him. That amber gaze, always assessing, always holding something behind it, and did not growl. That was not unusual in itself. Brutus had long since stopped growling at Ronan, but the quality of the dog's attention was different right now, and Ronan could feel it in the way you feel a change in temperature. Less vigilance, less of that constant thrumming readiness for the thing that was going to hurt. The dog looked at him with something that was, not to put too fine a point on it, almost relaxed. Maisie was watching him from 3 feet away. He likes you, she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, the statement of someone reporting observable data. He tolerates me, Ronan said. The girl considered this. That's not what I see. Ronan looked at her for a moment. What do you see? She thought about it with the seriousness of a child who understands that questions deserve real answers. He watches you, she said. Not like he's scared, like he's making sure you're okay. She paused. That's different. Ronan had no immediate response to that. He looked back at the dog, at the amber eyes, the slow, even breathing, the massive body that had simply put itself down beside this girl and chosen to rest. And he had the strange, disorienting sensation of seeing something he'd been looking at for 4 years from a completely new angle. He stood up, walked back to the booth, sat down. Walt was watching him. My men are going to need to ride out in about 20 minutes, Ronan said. Cold front's coming, and we've got distance to cover. Understood, Walt said. No disappointment in it, no request. Ronan was quiet for a moment. Harlan County, Highway 9 north to the interstate, then cut west on 31. Walt looked at him. There's a weigh station on 31 that's been running spot checks on vehicles matching certain profiles, family in an old sedan late at night. Ronan looked at his coffee. Might want to take Old Mill Road instead. Picks up the same interstate 20 miles further on. Walt was still looking at him, not speaking. Just a suggestion, Ronan said. Of course, Walt said carefully. The bell above the diner door opened, and 2 of the Covenant men came back in from checking the bikes, bringing cold air and the smell of exhaust and autumn with them. One of them, young, maybe 25, the one they called Lace, for reasons Ronan had never explained to anyone, stopped at the edge of the long booth and looked at Ronan with an expression that had something uncertain in it. "Ronan," he said, "got a problem outside." The parking lot was colder than the diner had let on. Ronan felt it hit him when he came through the door. A proper October cold. Not threatening yet, but getting serious about it. The kind that got into your collar and the gaps at your wrists and started making promises about what was coming. The neon behind him buzzed and swung slightly on its brackets. 3 men were standing in the lot near the edge of the highway. Not bikers. Or not the Iron Covenant. They had a look that said club to Ronan without anything more specific. The posture of men accustomed to moving in groups and being the largest thing in a given space. One of them had a phone to his ear. The other 2 were watching the Harleys in the lot, with the particular quality of attention that Ronan had learned a long time ago to treat as its own kind of statement. Bishop appeared at his shoulder from the direction of the side door. "Rolled up about 3 minutes ago. Pickup truck, no plates visible. 3 of them." "They say anything?" "Not yet, just standing." Ronan walked forward. The man with the phone saw him coming and said something quick into it and put it away. He was tall, taller than Ronan by 2 or 3 inches, with a jaw that had been broken at some point and healed slightly off-center, giving his face an asymmetry that was unpleasant to look at. He wore a canvas jacket, not cut, no patches. That was informative. "Nice bikes," the man said. "They run," Ronan said. "Long way from Millhaven to be stopped for coffee." A pause. Ronan let it settle. Around him, he could hear, without looking, because looking would be the wrong move, the quiet sounds of the Covenant orienting. Boots on asphalt, men finishing cigarettes and not relighting them. "You passing through?" the tall man said. "We were." "Were." The man's eyes moved past Ronan toward the diner's windows. The gesture was brief but deliberate, the kind of deliberate that was designed to be noticed. "Thing is, we're looking for someone. Old man and a little girl, driving a gray Civic, maybe 8 years old. You see anything like that on 9? Ronan looked at him. "No," he said. "No. No." The tall man nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're not accepting what they've been told but aren't yet ready to say so directly. Because there's people real concerned about that little girl's welfare. Family, you know. Want to make sure she's safe. "Good to have family that cares," Ronan said. "It is." The man's off-center jaw shifted. "So if you did happen to see something, there's a number." "We didn't see anything," Cord said from somewhere to Ronan's left. His voice was quiet and absolutely level. "And we've got road to cover." Another pause. Longer this time. The cold moved through the parking lot and the diner sign buzzed overhead, and the 3 men in the lot and the members of the Iron Covenant occupied the same 20 feet of asphalt, and the air between them had the texture of something that could go in either direction. Then the tall man stepped back. 1 step, unhurried, a retreat that was framed as a choice. "Well," he said, "you all ride safe." He turned. The other 2 followed. They got into the truck. The plates were turned up, Ronan registered, a deliberate obscuring, and the engine started and the truck pulled out onto Highway 9 heading north, its tail lights dwindling into the dark. Nobody moved until the lights were gone. "That was Karen Phelps's people," Bishop said, quiet. Not a question. Ronan turned back toward the diner. He pushed through the door. The warmth hit him. Eloise was behind the counter, and she had the look of someone who had watched what happened in the parking lot through the window and decided to be very busy with her coffee urns. Cord came in behind him, then Lace, then the others in 1s and 2s. Walt was still in booth 6. He had seen the men in the parking lot. Ronan could tell by the way he was sitting, the studied stillness of someone working to look calm, the coffee mug held in both hands again, the pale blue eyes tracking Ronan across the diner. Maisie had not looked up from Brutus. Ronan sat back down across from Walt. He did not say anything about the 3 men. He said, "They know this route." Walt set down the mug. His hands were not quite steady. "How close?" "Close enough that waiting isn't a good idea." Walt looked across at Maisie. The girl was sitting up now, not alarmed exactly, but present. Those large eyes had found Ronan's face with an attention that was too direct and too patient to belong to a child who didn't understand that something was happening. "Okay," Walt said quietly. "Just that." He reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket and took out a folded piece of paper. An old gas station receipt, Ronan saw, with handwriting on the back in blue pen. "My brother's address," he said, "case something happens to me on the road and someone needs to know where she was going." Ronan looked at the paper. He did not reach for it yet. "Nothing's going to happen to you on the road," he said. "You don't know that." "No," Ronan agreed, "but I know that 3 men in a truck without visible plates are not going to pull over a vehicle that's got 14 Harley-Davidsons between it and them." Walt looked at him for a long moment. That complicated expression again. The love and the grief and the private calculation. "You'd do that," he said. Not incredulous, just confirming. "We're heading north anyway," Ronan said. Which was not strictly true. They'd been heading south. The Harlan run was south, but Ronan didn't elaborate and Walt, to his credit, didn't press. He took the paper. They moved out 10 minutes later, Walt's gray Civic pulling from the lot first, and then the Harleys coming out behind it. Not in a rush, not dramatically, just a deliberate and unhurried formation that put the car at the center and the bikes around it the way a body positions itself around something it's decided to protect. Eloise stood at the diner window and watched them go. She'd comped Walt's meal without explaining why. She would think about the girl in the yellow raincoat for longer than she expected to. The night on Highway 9 was cold and flat and very dark, the road cutting through land that had been agricultural once and was now mostly returned to scrub. No lights except what the bikes made, that long column of headlights moving through the black, the sound of the engines enormous, and then receding and then enormous again as the wind shifted. Ronan rode at the rear of the formation, his position when they were moving something he needed to protect. From back here he could see the shape of the Civic in the cluster of headlights, Walt's careful driving, the slight figure of Maisie visible through the rear window, her face turned to look at the bikes around her. She raised her hand. Not a wave exactly, just a raised hand, palm out. The gesture of a child who has learned to acknowledge things rather than perform happiness about them. Ronan watched it and said nothing to himself and watched the highway. They rode for 40 minutes without event, the truck's taillights never reappearing. Then Cord pulled up alongside Ronan and held his position. They were in the habit of brief writing conversations, communication developed over years, and said nothing, just looked at him with a question in his profile that Ronan understood without words. Ronan shook his head. Not now. Cord dropped back. At the Old Mill Road junction, the formation slowed. Walt signaled and turned. Ronan held position on the main road and watched the Civic disappear down the narrower road, and then he signaled the rest of the formation forward and held at the junction for a moment longer, looking north on 9. Nothing on the road, nothing visible. He turned onto Old Mill Road. They picked up the interstate 22 miles further on, as advertised. Walt's car got on without incident. The bikes formed back up on the on-ramp, that familiar thunder of collected engines rising into the night. And for the next 30 miles, the Iron Covenant rode escort on an old man and a 7-year-old girl in a gray Civic, and nobody spoke about what they were doing or why. At a rest stop outside Dalton Creek, Ronan pulled the formation over. The cars and trucks of ordinary Saturday night travel moved past on the highway, while the Covenant sat on their bikes in the rest stop lot and smoked and drank gas station coffee and said very little. Walt had pulled over too, stretching his back at the side of his car with the careful movements of a man whose body is filing formal complaints. Maisie had gotten out and was sitting on the hood of the Civic, her yellow raincoat bright under the lot's fluorescent lights. Brutus was off the chain. That was Maisie's doing. She had asked, at the diner, if he could ride with her in the car, and Ronan had felt the refusal forming and then had looked at the dog and said, okay. The dog was beside the car now, sitting at Maisie's feet with the density of something deeply settled. Reyes came to stand next to Ronan. "We're 40 miles off the Harlan route," he said. "I know." "Decker's going to call." "Let him." Reyes was quiet for a moment. He had a cigarette going, and in the cold the smoke came off it fast and dispersed into the dark. "What do you know about the old man?" he said. Beyond what he told you? Not much. Because men who run with a kid in the middle of the night usually have a fuller story than the one they tell in a diner. Yeah, Ronan said. They do. So, Ronan looked across the lot at Walt. The old man had walked over to a trash can and was standing beside it, not using it, just standing, looking at the highway. Something in his posture that was not exhaustion, or not only exhaustion, something braced. The posture of a man who is waiting for a shoe he can see coming, hanging in the air, to drop. He's not telling me something, Ronan said, clearly. But the kid's real. What's happening to her is real. How do you know? Ronan said nothing for a moment. He thought about Maisie at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. He thought about the way she ate, methodically, without leftover motion, the eating of a child who had learned that mealtime might be the kind of thing that gets interrupted. He thought about the way she'd looked at Brutus, with that recognition that went beyond the ordinary animal and child familiarity, that felt like something more specific, something that had a location in memory. I know, he said. Reyes took a long drag and exhaled. Bishop thinks the same, he said, for what it's worth. Cord's not happy about the route change, but he'll ride. He dropped the cigarette, stepped on it. I'm not happy either, Ronan. I want that on the record. It's on the record. Good. Reyes walked back toward his bike. Ronan stood for another moment in the cold. Then he walked across the lot toward Maisie, who was still sitting on the hood of the Civic, her hands folded in her lap, watching the highway with those steady eyes. Brutus tracked Ronan's approach without tension. You should sleep, Ronan said. Long drive still. I'm not tired, the girl said. Then, after a pause, that's a lie. I am tired. Then sleep. I don't sleep well in cars. She said it without self-pity, a flat statement of operational reality. I used to, before. Before. The word sitting there between them with everything it contained. Ronan leaned against the car beside her. The metal was cold through his jacket. What do you do instead? Think? About what? She was quiet for a moment. About whether things are going to work out, she said. And then I think about how thinking about it doesn't help. And then I do it anyway. Ronan looked at the highway. A semi rolled past, its running lights orange and red against the dark, the sound of it filling the lot briefly and then fading. Yeah, he said. That sounds about right. She was looking at him. He could feel it, that direct, patient attention. Were you in a war? She asked. He looked at her. What makes you ask? The way you walk, she said. My friend Damien's dad walked like that. He said it was because you're always looking for where the problem's going to come from. Smart man. He had nightmares, Maisie said. Damien said he could hear them through the wall. She paused. Do you have nightmares? He thought about lying and decided against it. Yeah, he said. I do. She nodded, like he'd confirmed something she'd already worked out. Brutus does too, she said. I can tell. The way he moves in his sleep. Her hand went to the dog without looking. I think maybe that's why he knew I was okay. Ronan looked at the dog. Why's that? Because I have them too, Maisie said simply. Nightmares. And when you have them, you can tell who else does. It's like, she thought about it, like you can smell it. Not really smell it, but kind of. A long silence. The cold moved through the lot. Somewhere behind them, one of the bikes started and then settled back to idle. Maisie, Ronan said carefully. What happened? At Karen's house. The girl was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Her hands were still in her lap, very still. The yellow raincoat made her look younger than she was in this light, and she was already very young, and Ronan was aware of the specific care required here. The difference between asking and pressuring, between giving someone room to speak and crowding them toward a door they might not be ready to open. She has a son, Maisie said. Tyler, he's 16. She stopped. Ronan waited. He didn't like me, she said carefully, not accusatory, not performing victimhood, just a careful construction of language around something that was bigger than what the words could hold. He didn't like that I was there. What did he do? Ronan said. His voice had not changed. He was making specific, conscious effort. Maisie was looking at the highway, at the passing lights, at the dark between them. He locked me out of my room sometimes, when Karen wasn't home, and he'd... She stopped again, reorganized. He said things about my mom and dad, about how they didn't want me before, and that's why they left. The cold in the lot seemed to get more specific. He said they didn't want me, she said again, quieter. Because I was too much trouble. That's why there was an accident, because they were trying to get away from me. Ronan was looking at the side of the highway, and he was not moving, and he was not speaking, and something behind his face had shifted into a configuration that was very controlled, and very quiet, and very cold. Maisie, he said, that's not true. I know, she said, and then, I know that. But it's the kind of thing that, when someone says it enough, I know, he said. She looked at him. Yeah, she said softly. I thought you might. He stood up off the car. He needed to move. He took 3 steps across the lot and stopped, his hands at his sides, and breathed the cold air in through his nose and let it out. Cord was watching him from across the lot, saying nothing. Bishop had stopped mid-conversation and was reading Ronan's back with the attention of a man who knows what a certain set of shoulders means. He turned back to Maisie. You're not going back there, he said. She looked at him with those large, patient eyes. I know, she said. Grandpa Walt said. Grandpa Walt's right. She was quiet for a moment, then, what if they come? They won't. But if... He looked at her. He thought about the 3 men in the parking lot of the Crow's Rest with their truck and their obscured plates and their question about a little girl's welfare. He thought about Reyes's voice saying, that's not our business, and about the paper in his jacket with a Harlan County address on it in blue pen. He thought about the way Brutus had put his head down in this child's lap, while an entire brotherhood held its breath. Then they'll have to go through us, he said. Maisie considered this with the gravity it deserved. She looked at the line of Harleys across the lot. 14 machines, 14 men in their leather cuts, the Iron Covenant arranged in the fluorescent light of a highway rest stop in October. Okay, she said, the same word Walt had used. Just that. No performance, no relief, no gratitude larger than the moment required. She slid off the hood of the car. I'm going to try to sleep now, she said. Ronan opened the car door for her. Brutus got up and got in beside her without being directed, moving with a certainty that suggested he had already made decisions about where he was supposed to be and was simply implementing them. Maisie settled into the back seat. Ronan closed the door. He stood in the cold for a moment. He pulled out the folded receipt from his jacket pocket and looked at the Harlan County address in the pale lot light. Then he took out his phone and took a photo of it and sent it to Cord with no message. Then he looked up the name Karen Phelps. It took 6 minutes, using a contact he had in the county record system, a favor the club was owed and had never called in, until now. What came back was not a custody record. Not directly, it was a property record first, then a business filing, then, working backward from that, something that Bishop, who appeared at his shoulder without being summoned, reading the situation with the instinct of a man who had been riding beside Ronan for 11 years, saw over his shoulder and went very quiet about. Ronan, Bishop said, I see it. I know what it is. What it was a registration. A kennel operation licensed in the county system under a management company whose principals, once you pulled the filing, included a Tyler Phelps, 16 years old, a minor listed as a secondary contact, and a Karen Phelps as primary owner. A kennel operation that had been cited 3 years ago by the County Animal Welfare Office. And then the citation had been withdrawn, and then the operation had changed its registration category. And then, 18 months after the citation, it had closed entirely. But the original citation was still there, buried under the withdrawn notation, and it said words that Ronan read twice to make sure he was reading them correctly. And then he put his phone in his pocket and looked at the dark highway for a long time. Brutus. The dog with the scars under his coat that Maisie had found with her fingers in the Crow's Rest diner, with the amber eyes that never quite stopped watching for whatever was coming. 4 years in Ronan's care, found through a contact who'd pulled him from a situation Ronan had been told was a private rescue. No details offered, no details requested, because the dog had needed a home, and Ronan had needed something he couldn't name then, and still couldn't name with precision. He turned to Bishop. "Pull up whatever you can find on a kennel operation in Garrick Falls," he said. "Phelps family. Anything from 3 to 5 years ago, animal welfare records, county filings, anything." Bishop was already on his phone. "And Bishop," Ronan's voice was very quiet, "don't tell Reyes yet." Bishop looked at him. Because I need to think before Reyes starts talking." Bishop looked at him for another moment with those steady dark eyes, and then he nodded once and moved away. Ronan stood alone in the cold of the rest stop lot. The highway ran past in both directions. Walt Rowan's gray Civic sat in the lot with a dog and a sleeping child inside it. And somewhere south of here, the Harlan Run was waiting, and Decker was going to call in the morning, and Reyes had noted for the record that he was unhappy. And none of that was the thing currently pressing at the walls of Ronan Voss's chest like water finding cracks. The thing pressing was this. If the citation and the registration and the name lined up the way he thought they lined up, then Brutus had not come to him through a private rescue. Brutus had come to him from a situation connected by 3 degrees of business filings and 1 county citation to Karen Phelps. And Karen Phelps had Maisie. And Maisie had walked into the Crow's Rest diner and put her hand out palm up in front of a dog that no one could touch. And the dog had put his head in her lap like he'd been waiting 4 years to do exactly that, and said something with his body that no one in the room had been able to read until this moment, standing in a rest stop lot in the cold, when it became suddenly and completely legible. He knew her. He had always known her. Bishop was back. His face said what his voice didn't have to. "Ronan, the kennel operation. It wasn't a kennel." The cold was very specific now. "I know," Ronan said. "The citation was for an illegal fighting operation. Dogs." Bishop's jaw was tight. "They shut it down. Prosecution didn't stick because the primary witness—" He stopped, looked at the Civic. The primary witness was a child. She was 6 years old. She disappeared from the record after the rescue operation. The case went cold. The highway ran past them both in the dark. "She wasn't placed in witness protection," Bishop said carefully. "She was placed with a family member of the defendant." The silence between them was the kind that happens when you've walked into a room you can't walk back out of, when the door behind you is closed and what's in front of you is simply the full shape of what you're dealing with, rendered at last in complete and unambiguous detail. "They put her with Karen Phelps," Ronan said. "They put her with Karen Phelps," Bishop confirmed. And somewhere in the gray Civic 20 yards away, a 7-year-old girl who had watched her parents die in April was sleeping in the back seat beside a dog who had survived the same operation she had testified against at the age of 6, neither of them knowing, consciously, in words, what the other one was, only knowing in the language that lives below words, in the register that doesn't have a name, that they had been through the same fire and come out the other side, and that whatever they were to each other, it was not nothing. Ronan put his hand in his jacket pocket and felt the folded receipt with the Harlan County address. Then he heard Bishop draw a slow breath beside him, and he heard the sound of gravel under tires on the far end of the rest stop, and he looked up and saw the headlights. 1 set. 2. 3. Parking at the far end of the lot. Not a truck this time. 2 trucks and a car, and the men getting out of them were not the same 3 from the Crow's Rest, but they had the same quality of organized, unhurried movement, the quality of people who have been dispatched to perform a specific task and have no personal investment in how it goes. "Reyes," Ronan said, his voice carrying exactly as far as it needed to. Across the lot, Reyes straightened. "I know," Reyes said. He'd already seen them. His hand was at his side, his posture the particular stillness of a man who has done this before and knows the difference between the moment before and the moment of. "I know." The Iron Covenant moved. Not toward the newcomers, not yet. Toward the Civic. Quietly, efficiently, without drama, the way a body moves to cover what it's decided to protect. 14 men repositioning in a rest stop lot in the dark with the precision of long practice. And Walt Rowan, who had looked up from wherever his thoughts had taken him and was watching the trucks at the far end with the face of a man whose worst calculation has just proven correct, looked across the lot at Ronan Voss. Ronan looked back at him. Then he looked at the trucks. Then he heard, through the back window of the Civic, the small, clear sound of Maisie's voice. Not scared, not screaming, just talking, quietly, to the dog. And the even smaller sound of Brutus's response, that low sound that was not a growl, and he understood with the absolute clarity of a man who has finally seen the full shape of a situation that there was no version of this night in which he put that child back in a car headed south. He walked forward. Ronan walked forward, and the cold came with him. The men at the far end of the rest stop lot had the quality of people who had been given a job and had done it before and did not require anything from the situation except its conclusion. There were 6 of them total, 3 from the first truck, 2 from the second, 1 from the car, which was a dark sedan with county plates that Ronan clocked immediately and filed. Not police. The plates were county, not state, not municipal, not the configuration of law enforcement, administrative, the kind of vehicle assigned to someone whose job title involved the word services or affairs or department of, and who had learned that showing up with authority was often sufficient, and that the authority did not need to be the shooting kind to accomplish most of what needed accomplishing. The man who got out of the sedan was in his 50s. He wore a fleece vest over a button-down shirt that had no business being worn in October at 11 at night in a highway rest stop, and he carried a folder, and his name, Ronan would learn later, was Gerald Morrow, and he was a caseworker for the County Department of Children and Family Services, and he had been called by Karen Phelps at 9:47 that evening, and he had a court order folded inside the folder that authorized the immediate return of Maisie Rowan to the custody of Karen Phelps pending a hearing that had been scheduled very efficiently for 8 o'clock Monday morning. The 6 other men were not county employees. Ronan read them in the 3 seconds it took Morrow to find his footing on the asphalt. 2 of them had the specific build of men who had decided at some point that their body was a professional tool and had maintained it accordingly. One of them had a radio clipped to his belt. One of them had his hands out from his sides by about 4 inches, which was the posture of a man who wanted his hands available without making a production of it. These were not the 3 from the Crow's Rest, but they had come from the same direction, and Ronan understood that the 3 from the Crow's Rest had been scouts, and that what he was looking at now was the response team. Morrow raised a hand as he walked forward. "I need to speak with Walter Rowan," he said, projecting his voice across the distance between them with the practiced loudness of a man accustomed to making institutional announcements in spaces where they might not be welcome. "And I need access to the minor child." The Iron Covenant was between him and the Civic. It had happened without discussion. That was the thing about men who had ridden together long enough. The formation was not a decision, not a voted-upon position, not a coordinated tactic. It was the natural result of a shared understanding of what mattered in a given moment. 14 men had simply placed themselves, in the way water places itself when poured into a vessel, between the thing that was coming and the thing they'd chosen to cover. Reyes was to Ronan's right, Bishop to his left. Cord somewhere behind, which meant Cord was at the car, which was where Cord was supposed to be. Morrow stopped about 8 feet out. He had registered the formation and was recalculating something behind his eyes, though his face maintained the practiced neutrality of institutional authority. "This doesn't need to be complicated," Morrow said. "I have a court order, so let me see it," Ronan said. Morrow looked at him for a moment, then opened the folder and held out the paper. Ronan walked forward 3 steps, took it, held it under the lot's fluorescent light, and read it. It was real. The formatting was correct. The judge's name was correct. The seal was genuine. Ronan had looked at enough legal documents in his life to know the difference between a real one and a produced one, and this was real. Temporary emergency custody order. The language was the administrative kind, the bloodless institutional prose that described a human situation entirely in terms of its procedural components. He handed it back. "That order was obtained at what time?" Ronan said. "Excuse me?" "The timestamp on the filing. What time?" Morrow looked at the paper. 9:52. Ronan looked at him. My club arrived at the Crow's Rest Diner at 8:47. The three men Karen Phelps sent there arrived approximately 15 minutes after us. He let that sit. That means she made a call before 9 o'clock. Sir, I don't know what you think. She called her people before she called yours, Ronan said, which means her first move wasn't the legal one. Morrow said nothing. That's interesting, Ronan said. That's a choice a person makes when they're worried about what the child will say to a caseworker. The six men behind Morrow had stiffened slightly. The one with the radio had his hand near it. The two with the professional builds had shifted their weight in a way that was small and meant to be unnoticeable, and was not. I need access to the child, Morrow said again. That's not a request. I know it's not, Ronan said. Give me 5 minutes with the grandfather. I'm not authorized to... 5 minutes, Ronan said. Then you can do what you came to do. He turned before Morrow could respond and walked back to the Civic. Cord had Walt out of the driver's seat and off to the side of the car, and Walt was looking at the caseworker and the men behind him with the expression of a man watching the exact future he'd calculated arriving precisely on schedule, which was in some ways worse than being surprised, because it meant he had known and had not found a way to prevent it. Ronan stopped in front of him. The order's real, he said quietly. Walt closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them. I know. What aren't you telling me? Walt was looking at the folder in Morrow's hands across the lot. His jaw worked once. There are things in Maisie's record, he said. Things that were sealed after the incident 3 years ago. Ronan was very still. The kennel, he said. Walt looked at him sharply, quick, reflexive. The look of a man who has heard a word he wasn't expecting and needs to understand the shape of what he's walking into. You know about that, he said. I found the filing tonight. Walt put one hand on the car roof. His weight shifted onto it like something giving out at the foundation. Then you know what she saw. I know what she testified. The testimony was sealed. She was 6. They sealed it, and they placed her... He stopped, breathed. They placed her with Karen Phelps. I didn't know that when it happened. By the time I found out, the custody arrangement was already... Another breath. My son and his wife were alive then. It wasn't my place to fight it. And Karen was the legal sister, and Maisie was going to be with her parents mostly anyway. It was just weekends, holidays. There was no reason to think, until your son died, Ronan said. Until my son died. Walt's voice had gone to the flat, compressed register of grief that has been lived with long enough to become structural. And suddenly Karen had her full time. And suddenly Tyler had access to her every day. And I didn't know about the kennel connection until... He stopped again. When did you find out? Ronan said. 3 weeks ago. Walt looked at the ground. Maisie told me. She told me that Tyler had said something to her. He'd told her he knew about the dogs. He'd told her he remembered her. His voice went tight on the last word. He would have been 13 when it happened. He'd been there. He'd seen her. The cold of the rest stop was doing something very specific now. It had the character of cold that is not about temperature. He was using it, Ronan said. He was telling her that if she said anything about him, about how he treated her, he'd tell people she was the reason the operation got shut down. He'd tell people at her school. Walt's hand on the car roof was not steady. She's 7 years old, and he was using the worst thing she ever saw to keep her quiet. Ronan stood in the cold and breathed. In through the nose, slow, all the way down. Out. He had learned this in a place where losing control of his breathing meant losing control of everything else, and he used it now for the same reason. Because what was happening behind his face wanted to move outward, and this was not the moment for it to move outward. Does Morrow know any of this? He said. No, the file is sealed. All he has is the custody order. If we let him take her back to Karen's house tonight to... I know, Walt said, with Tyler there. I know. Walt's voice broke very slightly on the second one, just at the edge. Why do you think I ran? Ronan turned and looked at the Civic's back window. Maisie was visible through it, a small shape in the back seat, the yellow raincoat vivid against the dark. Brutus's bulk was beside her, and the dog was watching the men across the lot with the amber, assessing gaze that saw everything and gave nothing away. He turned back to the lot. Morrow was waiting, The 6 men behind him were waiting. The cold was not. Ronan walked across the lot. Morrow straightened. Ronan stopped 3 feet from him and spoke quietly enough that only Morrow could hear. Karen Phelps' son Tyler was present at an illegal animal fighting operation 3 years ago. The victim who testified against that operation was Maisie Rowan. She is currently in Karen Phelps' home. Tyler Phelps has been using knowledge of that testimony to coerce Maisie's silence about his treatment of her. He paused. If you put that child back in that house tonight and something happens to her, the court order in your folder is going to be Exhibit A in your deposition. Morrow looked at him. His face had the expression of a man trying to determine whether what he has just heard is a threat, a fact, or both. Those are serious allegations, Morrow said. They are. Do you have documentation? I have the original county citation for the kennel operation and the business filing connecting it to Karen Phelps. I have the withdrawal of prosecution record, and I can connect the dots to the sealed testimony. Ronan looked at him. I can have all of that in your supervisor's inbox at 7 tomorrow morning, or I can have it in front of a judge at 7 tomorrow morning. Your choice which office gets it first. Morrow was quiet for a long moment. His folder was in both hands. He looked at it, then at Ronan, then past him at the Civic. I can't ignore a court order, he said. I know. Even with, I know, I'm not asking you to. Ronan looked at him steadily. I'm asking you to get back in your car and call your supervisor and describe what you've just been told and wait for guidance. I'm asking you to give me until morning. That's all. And if I don't? Ronan said nothing. He just looked at the man with those February eyes, and Morrow, who had been doing this job for 18 years and had developed a functional understanding of which situations would resolve in expected ways and which would not, looked back at him and did the math. I'll be back at 6, Morrow said, with my supervisor and with a police escort. If the child is not available for safe transfer at that time, she'll be here, Ronan said. Morrow looked at him one more moment. Then he folded the folder back under his arm and turned and said something brief to the men behind him and walked back to the sedan. The 6 men moved back to the trucks without urgency. The engines started. The vehicles pulled from the lot. The Iron Covenant stood in the cold and watched them go. Then Reyes walked up and stood next to Ronan and said nothing for about 10 seconds, which was his version of extreme restraint. Tell me, he said finally. Ronan told him. Not all of it. Not the piece about Brutus. Not yet, because that piece was still assembling itself in his mind into something he could say out loud without it sounding like the kind of thing that happened in movies and not in rest stop lots on Highway 9 at midnight. But the kennel. Tyler. The testimony. The reason Walt ran. Reyes listened without speaking. His face during this was the face he used when he was running numbers. Not calculating violence, just calculating the dimensions of a situation. The weight of it. The architecture. When Ronan was done, Reyes was quiet for another moment. We have until 6, he said. Yes. That's 6 hours. Yes. To get her to Harlan County, which is 4 hours from here if we push. Reyes looked at the highway. Looked back at Ronan. You told him she'd be here at 6. I told him she'd be available for safe transfer, Ronan said. He can interpret that however he wants. Reyes turned this over. That's thin. I know. And if she gets to Harlan County, the grandfather's brother, what does he have? A piece of land and a family connection? Karen Phelps and her lawyer are going to have that county identified and a filing in by noon. Probably. So what does 6 hours buy? Ronan said, time to get the documentation in front of someone who can do something with it before Karen's lawyer gets the next order signed. Reyes said, who? I know a woman in the state AG's office. She worked a case with us 4 years ago, the Henderson situation. He looked at Reyes. She picked up then. She'll pick up now. Reyes looked at the sky, which was doing something with clouds that was going to be rain inside the hour. It's midnight, Ronan. I know what time it is. A silence. The highway ran past them, indifferent. A semi rolled through, its running lights orange and red, and gone. Okay, Reyes said. He said it the same way Walt had said it, the same way Maisie had said it, the single word of a person who has finished the argument with themselves and landed on a side. He walked back to the bikes. Ronan got into the Civic. Walt was in the passenger seat. Maisie was behind them, the yellow raincoat a brightness in the rearview mirror, Brutus a warm mass beside her. The car smelled of the gas station bag and old upholstery, and the faint particular smell of a dog who had been moving in cold air. "We're moving," Ronan said to Walt. "Now." Walt started the car. Ronan called the number from memory, which was the kind of thing you could do with a number you'd called enough times in the past to have it living somewhere below conscious retrieval. It rang 4 times, and then a woman's voice said her name, already awake, with the alert economy of someone who had received enough late calls to stop being surprised by them. "Ronan Voss," he said. A beat. "It's midnight." "I know. This isn't a social call." "No." He heard the shift in the background hit, the sound of a lamp or a chair, or the specific acoustic of someone sitting up in bed and reaching for a notepad. "Tell me," she said. He told her. The kennel citation, the business filing, the sealed testimony. The custody order obtained at 9:52 and the men dispatched before 9. The caseworker and his 6 companions and the 6 o'clock deadline. He told her who the child was and what Tyler Phelps had been doing with information he should not have had access to. And he told her where the files were and how she could pull them. And he listened to the sound of a pen moving on paper at the other end of the line. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "The sealed testimony," she said. "If the child was the primary witness and she was 6, she's 7 now. The prosecution dropped because the witness couldn't be put on a stand. But if the witness is now in the custody of someone connected to the defendant, that's the question," Ronan said. Another silence. The highway lights swept the car's interior in long, pale strokes as they moved. "I need until 4, she said. "Morrow's coming at 6. "I need until 4, she said again. "Then I can tell you if there's a mechanism. If there's a mechanism, we can potentially get an emergency review filed before 6. If there isn't, Ronan said, "I need to know that too." "I understand." A pause. "Ronan, is the child safe right now?" He looked in the rearview mirror. Maisie had her head back against the seat. Her eyes were closed. One hand was in Brutus's fur. The dog was watching the road through the rear window with his amber gaze, patient and present. "Yes," Ronan said. "Right now she's safe. Keep it that way until 4. "Yes, ma'am," he said, which was not something he said to many people, and meant it. He ended the call. Put the phone in his jacket. They rode for an hour in the formation, the Civic in the center, the Covenant around it, in the loose diamond that Ronan had developed over years for exactly this kind of movement. And the clouds that had been building came through on their threat, and the rain began. First the advanced scouts of it, single drops on the windshield, and then the real thing, steady and cold and October serious, the kind of rain that had no interest in being decorative. The Harleys were in it without shelter, and the men on them made no adjustment. No slowing, no huddling, no performance of suffering. They rode through the rain with the same equanimity they rode through everything, the collective posture of men who had decided a long time ago that weather was not an argument you won and had accordingly stopped having it. Ronan had his phone in his hand, watching the county records his contact had sent, building the chain. The kennel citation from 3 years ago named the operation under a shell company, Harrow Creek Kennels, and the principals named in the filing were Karen Elaine Phelps and a business partner named Dale Furrow, who had a separate record Ronan did not currently need. The citation specified 14 animals on the premises showing signs of injury consistent with organized fighting. The animals had been removed. The primary witness to the operation had been a child found on the premises, subsequently identified and placed in protective status. The case had been referred to the county prosecutor. The county prosecutor had reviewed the file and declined to pursue charges, citing insufficient evidence for prosecution in the absence of adult witness testimony. The case had been closed. The animals had been dispersed to rescue organizations. One of those animals was Brutus. Ronan sat with that for a moment in the wet dark of the moving car. He had received Brutus through a man named Cole Pruitt, who ran a legitimate rescue operation out of a barn in the eastern part of the county and who had, at the time, described the dog's history in the vaguest possible terms. Bad situation, previous owners unknown, behavioral challenges, needs experienced handler. Ronan had taken him on the basis of that description and the fact that Cole Pruitt was not a man who embellished. He pulled up Cole Pruitt's number now. It was 12:47 in the morning. He called anyway. Cole picked up on the second ring, which told Ronan that Cole Pruitt was either an insomniac or the kind of man who slept lightly enough that a ringing phone had him up before his conscious mind engaged, which was itself an informative fact about the shape of a life. "Ronan," Cole said, not surprised. Cole was not a man who was surprised by much. "The dog you gave me 3 years ago," Ronan said. A pause, long enough to be its own kind of answer. "What about him?" Cole said. "Where did he actually come from?" Another pause. The rain on the windshield, the highway unreeling in front of them. "Ronan, Cole." "I was asked not to." Cole stopped, started again. The rescue was court adjacent. The animals from the seizure went through a county liaison. I was asked to place them without attribution. Standard practice when there's ongoing legal. "The legal ended," Ronan said. "Prosecution declined." "I know. So tell me." Cole's exhale on the line was the exhale of a man releasing something he's been holding for a while. "He came off the Harrow Creek seizure. They pulled 14 dogs. Most of them were too damaged. 7 had to be put down. 4 were placed with rehabilitators. 2 went to sanctuaries." He paused. "Brutus was the one they said nobody would take." "Why?" "Because he'd been in the operation the longest. The behaviorists thought he was too compromised, too much history." Cole was quiet for a second. "I thought about saying no. Then I thought about what saying no meant for him. I called you because you're the only person I knew who might—" "You should have told me where he came from," Ronan said. "Yeah," Cole said. "I know." Ronan watched the rain on the windshield. "The child who found him," he said. "The one on the premises." Cole said nothing. "Cole." "I don't know much," Cole said carefully. "The court record was sealed. I know there was a child. I know she was on the property when the seizure happened. I know she'd been there before. She'd been there before the seizure, multiple times, brought by someone. And the dogs—" He stopped. "The behaviorist who assessed Brutus told me afterward. Off the record. She said the reason he wasn't entirely broken, the reason there was anything left to work with, was that someone had been visiting him, regularly, someone small. Someone who'd been talking to him the way you talk to something you're trying to keep alive. The rain, the highway, the sound of the engines outside, muffled by the car's windows. She didn't know who," Cole said. "The case was sealed, but she said—" Another stop. "She said whatever that child did for those dogs in whatever time she had with them, it was the difference between what was left and what wasn't." Ronan put the phone down. He sat for a moment looking at the road. Then he turned in the seat and looked at Maisie. The girl's eyes were open. She had not been asleep after all, or she had woken and not announced it, or she had never fully gone under. She was looking at the back of his head with those large, patient eyes, and in the dark of the car and the shifting light of passing highway fixtures, he could see that she knew something had shifted. Not the details. Children did not track details the way adults did. But the change in the quality of the silence in the car, the change in Ronan's posture, in the density of the air, she had registered all of that, and she was looking at him with the expression of someone waiting to understand how afraid to be. He looked at her for a moment, then he turned back to the front. "We're going to be okay," he said. Not to her, not to Walt, not to the rain outside, just into the car's interior. No one answered. But in the back seat, Brutus turned his head from the rear window and looked at the back of Ronan's head with those amber eyes, and then he put his chin down on the seat and made that sound again, the one without a name, the one that was below growl and below whine, and was just the sound of something old and damaged choosing, in this specific moment, to be still. They came off the highway at a junction called Mill Race and followed a county road for 6 miles in the rain, the pavement going from 2-lane to 1.5 and then narrowing again, and at the end of a gravel road that the GPS had no opinion about, They found what Cord had found on his phone 40 minutes ago. A garage operation called Teller's Repair, closed for the night, its bay doors down. Its owner, a man who had once been a prospect for the Iron Covenant, and had left on good terms, and whose number Cord still had, and who had, when Cord called him at 1 in the morning in the rain, said, "Fine, use the lot." The bay on the far right had a side door unlocked. Inside it was warmer than the outside, which was the most important thing. Oil-smelling, concrete-floored, the ceiling high and dark above a single work light that threw yellow over 2 vehicles in various states of disassembly. The men filed in through the side door and the double bay doors at the far end, which Cord got open without ceremony, and the Civic pulled inside, and the bay doors came back down, and for the first time since the rest stop lot, the Iron Covenant was out of the rain and in a contained space, and the sound of the rain on the metal roof was loud and steady, and nobody spoke for a moment. Walt got out of the car and stretched his back slowly, his face tight with the effort of keeping the pain private. Maisie got out with Brutus and stood in the garage's interior with the oil and the work light and the rain on the roof, looking around with those eyes. She did not look frightened. She looked like a child who has been in enough strange rooms to have developed a taxonomy for which kind of strange was which. Ronan stood at the bay door and looked at his men. They were wet. Not dramatically wet. Bikers did not do dramatic about weather, but soaked through in the specific, thorough way that comes from an hour in October rain at highway speed. Lace had his cut off and was wringing water out of it over the drain. Bishop was using a shop rag to get the worst of it off his beard. Reyes was on his phone in the corner, standing apart, his voice low and inaudible over the rain. Cord came to stand beside Ronan. He had a gas station coffee from somewhere that Ronan had not seen him obtain, which was Cord's particular talent, the appearance of logistics that no one had arranged. 4 o'clock, Cord said. Not a question. He'd been close enough to the phone call to gather the shape of it. If she's got something, if she doesn't, we move before 6 either way. Yes. Cord drank his coffee. The grandfather's not going to make it to Harlan tonight. Not in the rain. Not at his age. He was looking at Walt, who had found a metal stool near the workbench and sat down on it and was looking at the floor with the expression of a man who has been carrying something across a great distance and has been allowed briefly to set it down and is now aware of how heavy it was. We stay here until 4? Until 4, Ronan said. Then we know what we're dealing with. He pushed off the door and walked to Maisie. The girl was sitting on the concrete floor with her back against the Civic's front tire, her knees up, Brutus pressed against her side. She had taken off the yellow raincoat and had it bundled on her lap, and in the work light she looked very small and very present, both at once, the combination that she had been producing all evening, the smallness of her age and the presence of something that was not her age. Ronan sat down on the floor beside her. The concrete was cold through his jeans. He did not make a production of it. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. Then, that's not all the truth, but okay is the short version. He almost smiled. What's the long version? She was quiet for a moment. In the garage around them, the sounds of the Covenant settling, quiet voices, the pop of someone cracking their knuckles, the low sound of Reyes still on his phone in the corner, the rain on the roof. I heard you on the phone, she said. I wasn't trying to. I know. You were talking about the dogs. She was looking at Brutus. Her hand was moving in his fur again, that deliberate, careful motion. The place where the dogs were. Ronan said nothing. I was there, she said. I know you know. Yeah, he said. My dad's friend took me. A few times. She said it the way she said everything. Flat, factual, the construction of language around a shape that was larger than the words. He said it was a farm. He said the dogs were for sports. I didn't... She stopped. I knew it wasn't right. I knew something was wrong with it. But I was 6 and he was my dad's friend and I didn't have... She stopped again. I kept going because of the dogs. Because I knew if I went, I could talk to them. And if I talked to them, it helped. Ronan looked at the side of her face. The work light made her look older, or showed something older inside the face she had. You helped them, he said. I tried. She was quiet for a second. One of them in particular, the one they kept separate because he was too dangerous. He was in a pen by himself, and nobody would go near him. She paused. But he'd let me. Ronan looked at Brutus. He'd let me sit with him, Maisie said. I'd just sit there. I'd talk to him. I'd tell him things. I told him my name. I told him about my mom and what she smelled like and what she was like when she laughed. I don't know why. It just seemed like he needed to know something real. The rain, the roof, the work light. And then one day the police came, she said, and there were a lot of people and a lot of noise, and someone put me in a car, and someone else took the dogs away in trucks. And I didn't... Her voice shifted, just barely, at the bottom of it. I didn't know where they took him. I asked. Nobody would tell me. They said I wasn't supposed to know. She paused. I asked my parents. I asked my dad. He got very quiet, and he said the dogs were fine, and we weren't going to talk about it anymore. She looked at Brutus. And then they died, she said, and everything else happened. And I stopped thinking about it because there were too many other things to think about. She was quiet. And then tonight I walked into that diner and a dog put his head in my lap. Ronan sat on the cold concrete beside a 7-year-old girl in a repair garage in the rain and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that was adequate to the architecture of what she had just described, the way the specific past had bent itself into the specific present, the way two damaged things had moved through 4 years of separate darkness and ended up in the same diner on the same highway on the same October night. He looked at Brutus. The dog was looking at him. Those amber eyes, level and present and holding as they always did. Something behind them that Ronan had spent 4 years trying to read and had never fully translated, until now. Cord appeared above him. Ronan, the tone was specific. Ronan looked up. Reyes, Cord said. Just the name. Ronan stood. Crossed the garage floor to where Reyes was standing in the corner with his phone down at his side and an expression on his face that Ronan had seen before, twice, in specific circumstances that had both resulted in significant alterations to the shape of things. What? Ronan said. Reyes looked at him. I made some calls while you were on with your AG contact. He said it without apology, which was Reyes' way, not asking forgiveness, just reporting. I wanted to know more about Karen Phelps beyond the kennel filing. And Karen Phelps is not a woman who operates small. Reyes held his phone up. The screen showed a business filing. Different name, different state, same cluster of principals. The kennel was one operation. She runs 2 others under different entities. Animal trading, technically. Legal, on paper. The animal welfare citations don't stick because the lawyers are faster than the investigators. Ronan looked at the screen. But that's not the part I'm calling you over for, Reyes said. He scrolled. The business partner, Dale Furrow, the one on the original Harrow Creek filing. What about him? Reyes looked at him directly. He's connected to a man named Victor Crane, out of the eastern part of the state. Crane runs a network. I don't know the full shape of it. Nobody I called knew the full shape of it. But the word that kept coming up from 3 different people who have no reason to coordinate their answers was trafficking. The rain on the roof. Not animals, Reyes said. Ronan stood completely still. The kennel was the front, Reyes said, his voice very quiet and very level. Or part of the front. The animal operation was real. It happened. But it wasn't the whole thing. Crane uses operations like that to move product and to identify. Reyes stopped. His jaw worked. To identify candidates. Children who come onto the property with adults. Children who are... He looked at Maisie across the garage. Available. The word sat in the air between them with the full weight of what it contained. Karen Phelps has custody of Maisie Rowan, Ronan said. His voice was coming from somewhere below his chest, from somewhere that had no heat in it. Karen Phelps is connected to Dale Furrow, who is connected to Victor Crane, Reyes said, and the court order putting Maisie back in that house was filed at 9:52 tonight. After 3 men showed up at the Crow's Rest. After 3 men who work for Furrow's security company showed up at the Crow's Rest, Reyes confirmed. I got that in the last 10 minutes. The company's registered. The 3 men are employees. Ronan looked across the garage. At Maisie on the floor with her dog and her yellow raincoat and her large, patient eyes. at Walt on the stool with his two-handed grip and his careful exhaustion, at the Covenant around them, wet, road-worn, arranged in the space as they always were, the natural geometry of men who had decided without announcement what they were for. He looked back at Reyes. "How deep does this go?" he said. Reyes looked at his phone, then at Ronan. "That's the question I've been sitting with for the last 20 minutes, he said. "And the answer I keep coming to is deeper than a county caseworker with a folder can help us with." The rain intensified briefly, drumming the roof in a surge, and then backed off to its steady weight. "The AG contact," Reyes said. "She's looking at the sealed testimony and the custody connection," Ronan said. "She doesn't know about Crane yet." "She needs to know about Crane." "I know. Now, Ronan, not at 4. He was already pulling out his phone, and that was when the side door opened and Lace came through it fast, wet again, his face carrying the specific expression of a man who has just seen something outside that he did not expect and did not like, and behind him came the sound, carrying through the open door before Lace got it shut again, of engines, not Harleys. The different, lighter sound of vehicles on gravel, approaching the garage from the road. "Company," Lace said. Reyes was already moving, Bishop already up. The Covenant reconfiguring around the garage with the quiet, immediate efficiency of men who have been in rooms that became situations before. And Ronan counted 3 vehicles by the sound of it, and his AG contacts number was on his screen, not yet dialed. And across the garage, Maisie had stood up with Brutus at her side and was looking at him with those large eyes that were not panicked and not performing calm, but were instead doing something more difficult, which was actually being calm. The calm of a child who has learned that staying still is sometimes the only power you have left. And Ronan looked at her and looked at the door and looked at his phone and understood that whatever the next 30 seconds produced, they were past the point where any version of tonight could be undone. And the only question remaining was what shape forward took. The side door swung shut behind Lace, and the sound of gravel under tires was very clear now. 3 sets of it, moving slow and deliberate the way vehicles move when they already know you're inside. Ronan dialed. She picked up on the first ring. "I was going to call you. Listen," he said. "Victor Crane. Connected to Dale Furrow. Connected to Karen Phelps. The animal operation was a front. Partial front. Crane's network is larger and it involves children, and I need whatever you have on him in the next 30 seconds because we have vehicles on the property where we're sheltering, and I need to know if you've already got a file on this man or if I'm handing you something new." Silence. 3 seconds of it. Then, "Where did you get that name? Do you have a file?" "Ronan." Her voice had changed registers entirely. The professional neutrality was gone, replaced by something precise and stripped down. "We have a task force. 8 months. Victor Crane is the primary subject. We have been building toward an action for 6 weeks. A pause. "Where are you right now?" He gave her the address. "Do not engage," she said immediately. "Whatever is outside that building, do not engage. I'm making a call right now, and I need you to—" "I have a 7-year-old girl and an old man and 14 bikers in a garage," Ronan said. "And I have vehicles on the gravel that are not police. Tell me how long." 40 minutes. That's not good enough. 35. Ronan, make it 25, and I'll do what I can with the rest. He ended the call. Bishop was at his shoulder. "How many?" 3 vehicles. Could be 2 per, could be more. Ronan looked at the bay doors, at the side door, at the single high window on the east wall. "They're not coming in fast, they came quiet." "Because they don't want noise," Reyes said from across the garage. He was at the east wall, below the window, not looking out yet. "Noise attracts attention. They want to do this clean." "Which means they're not sure what they're walking into," Cord said. "Which means they don't know how many of us there are," Bishop said. Ronan looked at the Civic. At Maisie standing beside it with Brutus pressed to her left leg, the dog's body oriented toward the side door, his amber eyes fixed and still and completely certain. Walt had come off the stool and was standing with his hand on the car's roof, and his face had shed the exhaustion and found something beneath it, something older and less patient than the man who'd ordered coffee at the Crow's Rest. "Walt," Ronan said. "Tell me what to do," Walt said. "Back corner, far wall. Take Maisie and the dog and get behind the Jeep." The Jeep was the larger of the two vehicles under repair, an older model with a solid steel frame that would do what they needed it to do if doing what they needed it to do became necessary. "You stay there until I come for you personally. Anyone else comes for you." "I understand," Walt said. Ronan looked at Maisie. The girl was looking at him, not at the door, not at the window, at him. Those eyes level and present and doing the thing they did. The actual calm, not the performed kind. "Maisie," he said. "I know," she said. "Corner. Stay down. Don't come out." He hadn't said any of that. She'd assembled it from the texture of the last 30 seconds. He looked at her for one moment. This girl who had testified at 6 years old and carried it at 7 and would carry it longer and had still, tonight, in a roadside diner, walked toward the one thing that everyone else was walking away from. "Yeah," he said. She went. Walt's hand found her shoulder and they moved to the back corner together, Brutus between them, the three of them settling into the shadows behind the Jeep's bulk with a quiet that was its own kind of courage. Ronan turned to his men. He did not make a speech. He did not have to. 11 years of riding together produced an efficiency of communication that operated below language, a look, a positioning of the body, a quality of attention that conveyed the full operational picture without requiring it to be narrated. He looked at each face in the garage's work light. Bishop, who had been in worse rooms than this and had come out of all of them. Reyes, whose unhappiness about the evening's decisions was a matter of record, and who was nevertheless standing with his weight distributed the way men distribute it when they're prepared for contact. Cord, quiet and specific, already at the optimal position near the bay door's release without being directed there. Lace, young enough that his fear was visible in a way the older men's wasn't, but holding it, working with it, using it the way you were supposed to use it. The others, 8 more men arranged around the garage's perimeter with the natural geometry of people who understood what perimeters were for. Nobody spoke. The gravel outside went quiet. The engines had stopped. Ronan pulled the bay door release 3 inches, Cord was on it already, ready, and put his eye to the gap. 3 vehicles, 2 trucks, 1 SUV, all dark, all without identifying markings. He could see figures. Not clearly, the rain was still moving. The lot's exterior lighting was a single pole light at the road end that threw more shadow than illumination. He counted bodies. 7 visible, possibly more inside the vehicles. They had not moved toward the building yet. They were waiting. Ronan pulled back, looked at Reyes. "They're holding. They called first," Reyes said quietly. "They're waiting for a call back that they don't know isn't coming." The caseworker, Morrow. They would have expected Morrow's team to have made contact, to have produced the child through legal channels, to have made this unnecessary. When Morrow had pulled back instead, something upstream had made a decision about what happened next. "How long do they wait?" Bishop said. "Not long," Ronan said. He was right. The figures outside began moving 2 minutes after the engine stopped, and they moved in the way of men who have an objective and a timeline and are past the portion of the evening that involved patience. 2 went to the side door, 2 went around the back. 3 came to the bay doors directly. Ronan looked at Cord. Cord nodded. "Let them in," Ronan said. Quiet as a fact. Because the thing about a garage was that it had 1 set of bay doors and a side door and a high window and a back access that the men going around the building were going to find locked, which they would then spend time with, and time was what Ronan needed. And because the thing about opening a door to people who expect to force it was that it changed the equation, took the momentum they'd built around the forced entry and put it somewhere they hadn't planned for, and in the gap between the plan and the reality was where things could go differently. Cord hit the bay door release. The door swung up. Rain and cold and the harsh white of headlights from the trucks came in together, and 3 men were standing in the opening with the light behind them, and for 2 full seconds nobody moved, because the 3 men had expected a dark garage and a hiding family, and 14 Iron Covenant members arranged in a loose arc across the full width of the space was not what their planning had accounted for. The man in the center was not one of the 3 from the Crow's Rest. He was older, broader, with a quality of blunt authority that came from having given orders long enough to have forgotten how it felt to take them. He wore a jacket with a company logo. A security firm, legitimate looking, the kind of thing that provided cover for the kind of work that needed covering. He had a phone in his hand that he lowered slowly as he looked at what was in front of him. "We're looking for a Walter Rowan," he said. Conversational, professionally calm. "This doesn't involve anyone else." "He's not here," Ronan said. "We have reason to believe." "He's not here," Ronan said again. The man with the blunt authority looked at him for a moment, reading the garage, doing the arithmetic of 14 men against his visible 3 plus however many were at the side and the back. His jaw moved once. "Son," he said, "you are in the middle of something you don't understand. Walk away from it, and everyone in this building goes home tonight." "I understand it fine," Ronan said. "You understand the custody angle. You understand the family dispute angle." The man took one step into the garage. The two behind him came with him. "You don't understand the rest of it, and you don't want to." "Victor Crane," Ronan said. The man stopped. 3 feet of rain-wet concrete between them and the man's face had done something that was extremely informative. Not fear, men like this didn't have that kind of fear, but a rapid, precise recalculation that moved across his features and was gone in under a second, leaving behind a stillness that was more dangerous than the calm he'd come in with. "Where did you hear that name, Lit?" he said. "Doesn't matter." "It matters considerably." "There's a task force," Ronan said. 8 months. They've had your employer's name on a board in a federal building for 8 months. Tonight, about 4 minutes ago, I gave them this address. He looked at the man without expression. "How you spend the next 20 minutes is your business. But I'd think carefully about what you do in this building, because there are people who have been building a case specifically so that everything that happens in buildings like this one becomes evidence." The man was still looking at him. The recalculation was still running behind his eyes. Then the side door came open. The two who'd gone around were through it. They'd either gotten the lock or someone inside had made an error. And they came through fast, which changed the geometry. And what happened next happened in about 4 seconds of very compressed, very specific action that Ronan was in the middle of before the conscious part of his mind had finished processing the inputs. Bishop moved first, because Bishop was always first when something came through a door. And the first man through the side entrance was larger than Bishop only in the technical sense, in the sense that his measurements were greater, and Bishop's particular gift was the ability to make that fact irrelevant in the first 2 seconds of physical contact. There was the sound of it, not the sound movies made, which was theatrical and rhythmic, but the real sound, which was percussive and brief and graceless, and the first man was on the concrete. The second man through the side door had a different read on the situation and pulled up short inside the doorway and put his hand at his jacket, and Reyes was across the garage floor in 3 steps and had the man's wrist at a specific angle before the hand got to wherever it was going and said very quietly, "Don't." The man didn't. The 3 at the bay door had not moved during this. The blunt authority man was watching what had happened at the side door and was completing his arithmetic and arriving at a number he did not like. His 2 companions had shifted their weight, the same 4-inch out from sides posture that Ronan had read in the rest stop lot. And Ronan looked at them and looked at the man and said nothing, because silence at this specific moment was more legible than speech. Outside, a car engine started. The SUV. Ronan heard it through the open bay doors, heard it turn in the lot, heard the wheels on gravel, and Cord was moving, already at the bay door's edge, looking out. And Cord said one word, "Leaving." The SUV pulled from the lot and onto the road, and its lights diminished in the rain and were gone. The blunt authority man watched his transportation depart, and his face did not change, but something behind it did. Ronan said, "Your driver made a decision." "Apparently. That's the decision of a man who has already calculated the cost of being here when the federal vehicles arrive." "You keep saying federal." "Victor Crane is a federal matter, has been for 8 months. Ronan looked at him. "You've been doing this long enough to know what that means for the people who are still on the property when they arrive." The man looked at the concrete between them. He was doing the math that was not the physical math, not the 14 bodies against his depleted number, but the longer math, the math of consequences and exposure and the specific vulnerability of a man who has done enough of this kind of work to have enough of it to answer for. "Where's the girl?" he said. "Not here," Ronan said. "If I walk out of here—" "Walk," Ronan said. A pause. Long enough to breathe through, the rain on the roof, the man on the concrete near Bishop, not unconscious but not attempting to stand, the man at the side door with Reyes's hand on his wrist. "You don't know who you're protecting her from," the blunt authority man said. Not a threat. Something flatter than that. The statement of a man who has seen the architecture of the thing from a different angle and wants, for reasons that might or might not be simple, for the man across from him to understand its dimensions. "Tell me," Ronan said. The man looked at him. "Crane's been operating in this region for 11 years. He has arrangements with people whose names you would recognize, county names, state names. The case your federal contact has been building. The people on the other end of that case are not going to go quietly, and the first thing they're going to do when the case breaks open is find every loose variable." "The child is a variable," Ronan said. "The child is the variable," the man said. She was on that property. She can identify what she saw. She was 6 years old and her testimony was sealed, but a sealed file is not a destroyed file, and when this goes federal, there are people whose only play is to ensure that certain testimony never becomes available. The garage was very quiet. "That's why they moved tonight," Ronan said. "Karen Phelps made a call 4 days ago," the man said, "to Furrow. Said the girl was asking questions. Said she'd told the grandfather something." He paused. "I'm telling you this because I'm telling you, not because it changes anything about what I was sent here to do, but I'm telling you." Ronan looked at him for a long moment. "Walk," he said again. The man turned. He said something brief and quiet to his two companions that Ronan did not catch, and they moved toward the bay door opening, and the first man, the one Bishop had put on the concrete, was on his feet now, slowly, holding his side, and he went too, and the blunt authority man paused at the threshold of the bay doors with the rain in front of him and the garage behind. He did not turn back. "She's going to need more than tonight," he said to the rain. Then he walked into it. Ronan watched the trucks back out of the lot. One of them took longer. The man who'd been at the side door was in the passenger seat, and Ronan could see through the window that he was on his phone, and he watched the truck for the full duration of its presence in the lot without blinking, reading the body language through the glass. And then the truck followed the first one out onto the road, and their lights went north and were gone. The bay doors stayed up. Rain came in at the edge of them. Cord was at his shoulder. "That was too clean," Cord said. "Yes," Ronan said. "Men sent to do a job don't walk because someone says federal." "No?" "They walk because they already know the job's been called," Cord said. "Someone upstream made a call while they were standing there." Ronan was looking at the road where the trucks had gone. "The driver left first," he said, "in the SUV. Before you said anything useful," Cord confirmed. "Before the conversation." They stood with that. The rain. "Someone in that vehicle made a call," Ronan said, "and whoever they called said pull back. Which means whoever they called knew the task force was moving tonight," Cord said. Which means the 8-month case is not as contained as my contact thinks it is," Ronan said. He pulled out his phone. She picked up in one ring. "We're 20 minutes out," she said immediately. "They were already leaving when you called them off," Ronan said. A pause. "I didn't call them off. Someone did. Before I'd said anything that would motivate a rational actor to leave, someone in one of the vehicles received a call and the decision was made upstream." He paused. "You have a problem inside the task force." Her silence was a specific length. The length of a person processing an implication they were not entirely unprepared for, but had hoped to be wrong about. "How many people knew this address?" she said, careful. "I gave it to you 4 minutes before they pulled back." Another silence. "Keep the child secure," she said. Her voice had gone very flat and very operational. "I'm calling a secondary channel. Don't move. 15 minutes." She ended the call. Ronan stood in the open bay door with the rain at the edge of it and the cold coming in around him and looked at the property around the garage, the gravel lot, the road, the dark tree line beyond it, the absence of headlights in either direction. He turned, walked to the back corner. Walt straightened when he came around the Jeep. Maisie was on the floor with her back against the wall and Brutus between her knees, and she looked up at Ronan with those eyes and waited. "We're okay," Ronan said. Walt exhaled through his nose, a long, controlled exhale. "I heard most of it," he said. "I know." "The man said she needs more than tonight." "He did." Walt looked at the floor. His hands were not shaking. They were pressed flat against his thighs, an act of will that Ronan recognized. "How much more does she need?" "I'm working on that," Ronan said. He looked at Maisie. She was looking at him with the same expression she'd had in the crow's rest when she'd walked toward Brutus. Not fearlessness, not recklessness, but the specific quality of a person who has decided that whatever is on the other side of this moment, they are not going to approach it at a crouch. "The bad men left," she said. "The ones who were here," Ronan said. "Yes." She heard the distinction. He watched her hear it. "But there are more," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Her hand was in Brutus's fur. "Is it because of what I saw? When I was little?" He sat down in front of her, eye level. On the concrete again, the cold of it, the oil smell. "Yes," he said, because she was 7 years old and she had already been told enough partial truths for one lifetime, and he was not going to add to the collection. She absorbed this, the way she absorbed everything. Not immediately, not with visible reaction, but with a quality of internal processing that was thorough and private and arrived at something solid rather than something defensive. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he agreed. "What do we do now?" "We wait 15 minutes, he said, "and then we make a call that changes the shape of this." She nodded once. Then she looked at Brutus. "He knew," she said. "Before they came. He knew something was wrong." Ronan looked at the dog. Brutus was watching the bay door from the back corner with those amber eyes, the dog's body language different from his usual threat assessment. Less the coiled anticipation of something incoming, and more the settled alertness of something that has moved past the immediate danger and is now maintaining watch. Protecting backward, not forward. "He's good at that," Ronan said. "He always was," Maisie said. She said it with a quiet certainty that spanned 4 years of separately lived time and arrived intact on the other side of all of it. Reyes appeared around the Jeep. He did not crouch. He stood with his arms across his chest and looked at Ronan with an expression that was a question. Ronan stood, walked with him to the side of the Jeep, out of Maisie's direct line of sight. "Task Force has a leak," Ronan said quietly. "How bad?" "Unknown. She's going to a secondary channel." Reyes looked at the floor. "Secondary channel means it gets smaller, tighter, fewer people." He looked up. "But it also means slower, more deliberate." "Yes." "And until the secondary channel moves, we're the only thing between her and people who have been operating for 11 years and know this region better than we do," Ronan said, "and who have whatever name or names in the county or state infrastructure that got them a court order at 9:52 tonight." Reyes uncrossed his arms, crossed them again. The gesture of a man whose body is processing something that his mind has already accepted but that hasn't moved all the way through him yet. "The Harlan run is gone," he said. "Yes." "Decker's contract?" "Gone," Ronan said. "The club's exposure if this goes sideways." "Reyes." Ronan looked at him. "I know what I'm asking." Reyes looked back. In the work light, the garage was a world of shadows and oil and the sound of rain, and Reyes's face had the particular quality of a man who has been in the argument with himself long enough to know which side he always ends up on, regardless of what the reasonable position was. "I'm still not happy," Reyes said. "It's on the record," Ronan said. Reyes turned and walked back into the garage. Ronan's phone vibrated. Unknown number. Not the AG contact, different prefix. He picked up. The voice on the other end was a man's, older, the kind of voice that had spent time in courtrooms and emerged from them unhurried. "Mr. Voss, I'm calling on behalf of a colleague you spoke with earlier tonight. She asked me to reach you because she can't use her primary number for the next hour." "Who are you?" Someone who has been working on the Victor Crane matter for considerably longer than 8 months, the man said. I understand you're sheltering a child whose testimony may be central to a case that has been, until tonight, very carefully managed. Managed, Ronan said. Protected, the man said. The leak your contact identified, it's not new. We've known about it for 6 weeks. We have been making decisions around it. A pause. The task force was going to move in 4 days. Tonight's events have compressed that timeline. How compressed? We're asking you to hold position for 2 hours, the man said. After that, we can extract the child and the grandfather to a location where they will be genuinely safe. Not safe in the sense of a court order, safe in the sense of federal protective status. 2 hours. Ronan looked at the bay doors, at the dark road beyond the lot. The men who were here walked away from a job, he said. They don't do that because someone said please. No, the man agreed. They do it because Victor Crane made a calculation. Which is that a direct action tonight created more exposure than it resolved, given the task force timeline, given what your contact was able to establish in the last 40 minutes. The man paused. But a calculation can be recalculated. If Crane decides the risk equation is shifted, he sends them back, Ronan said. Or he sends someone else, the man said. 2 hours, Mr. Voss. Can you hold for 2 hours? Ronan looked across the garage. At Bishop near the bay doors, watching the road. At Cord by the side entrance, the same. At Lace and the others, distributed through the space, wet and tired and steady, 14 men in a garage in the rain who had started the night heading south on a different piece of business entirely, and had, through a sequence of choices that had followed their own internal logic to this point, ended up here. At the back corner, Maisie had her cheek against Brutus's head again. Walt had his hand on the girl's shoulder. The yellow raincoat was balled in her lap. Brutus was watching the bay doors. 2 hours, Ronan said. He put the phone down. He walked to the center of the garage and stood where the work light was strongest and looked at the faces of his men, one by one. Not speaking, not needing to. 11 years and then some of shared road had produced between these men a language that did not require words for its most important statements. And what he said to each of them in that look was simply the full, unambiguous picture. What they were in, how deep it went, what 2 hours meant, and what he was asking of them. And that he was asking, not ordering, and that the difference between those two things had always mattered to him, and still did. One by one they looked back. Bishop cracked his knuckles, the sound of it loud in the quiet garage, and turned back to the bay doors. Reyes said nothing and moved to the east wall. Cord checked the side door lock. Lace exhaled once and took up a position near the Civic and stood with his arms loose at his sides and his eyes on the high window. The others arranged themselves, not dramatically, without performance. The natural, unremarkable movement of men who have decided what they are and are simply being it here in this specific room for this specific stretch of time. Ronan looked at the bay doors. The road beyond was dark and wet and gave nothing away. 58 minutes into the 2 hours, in the flat quiet of the garage with the rain steady overhead, and the men at their positions, and Maisie asleep against Brutus in the back corner, and Walt asleep on the floor beside her with his head on his folded canvas jacket, Bishop said Ronan's name from the bay door in a tone that was not alarmed, but was not casual either, the tone of a man reporting something that requires immediate integration, and Ronan crossed the garage floor and stood beside him and looked out at the road. The headlights were not coming from the direction the trucks had left. They were coming from the north. Multiple sets, moving fast. And behind them, just visible at the edge of where the rain and the dark converged, the silhouettes of 2 more vehicles that were running without lights at all. And Ronan stood in the bay door opening with the rain on his face and looked at what was coming down that road and understood, with the absolute clarity of a man who has been in enough situations to know the difference between the moment before and the moment itself, that whatever 2 hours had meant, they were not going to have them. And the only question now was how the next 10 minutes went and what was left on the other side of them, and whether the thing they'd built tonight, the fragile, temporary, rain-soaked circle of protection around a sleeping girl and an old man and a dog who had been waiting 4 years to rest, would hold against what was coming down that road in the dark. He turned. "Everybody up," he said. The headlights came in fast, and the Iron Covenant met them in the open bay. Not inside. Outside. Ronan had made that call in the 3 seconds between saying, "Everybody up and moving," because inside was where Maisie was, and the space between what was coming and where she slept was going to be the men, all of them, in the rain, on the gravel, which was the only geometry that made sense. They went out through the bay doors in a line, and the cold hit them, and the headlights hit them, and for one suspended second it was just light and rain and 14 men standing on wet gravel with their cuts dark and their boots planted and the garage behind them. Then the vehicles stopped, and the doors opened, and the people who got out were not the blunt authority man's people, and they were not Furrow's people, and it took Ronan 2 full seconds to process what he was seeing, which was federal identification held at chest height, and voices announcing themselves in the flat, official cadence of people who have done this announcement enough times to have stripped all drama from it, and behind the first 2 vehicles, the ones running without lights, resolved themselves into black SUVs with antenna configurations that belonged to a specific kind of operational presence. 12 agents, maybe more still in the vehicles, and at the front of them, in a coat that had rain on the shoulders and a face that was tired in the way of someone who had been awake since the beginning of this and had moved fast to get here, was the woman from the AG's office. She looked at Ronan across the gravel. "Secondary channel moves faster," she said. He said nothing for a moment. Around him he felt the Covenant absorb what was in front of them, the recalibration of it, the specific shift from prepared for contact to something that didn't have the same name but required its own kind of management. "The vehicle's coming from the north," he said. "Ours," she said. "We had eyes on the lot for the last 40 minutes. The men Crane sent the second time." She paused. "They turned around before they reached the property. They saw us first." Ronan looked at the road to the north, empty and dark and wet. "It's over," she said. Not triumphantly, just as information, delivered in the tone of someone who knows that over is a more complicated word than it appears when you're standing in its immediate aftermath. He went back inside and crouched in the back corner where Walt and Maisie were. Walt had woken when the voices started outside and was sitting up with his hand on Maisie's shoulder, and Maisie was awake too. Fully, immediately awake, in the way of a child whose sleep has been light for months. She looked at Ronan. "Federal agents," he said. "Outside. They're here for Crane." Walt closed his eyes. "It's done?" Walt said. "The immediate part," Ronan said. "The rest takes time. But she's not going back to Karen's house. Not tonight. Not after tonight." Walt opened his eyes. They were wet. He did not make a production of it, just sat with it for a moment, his hands flat on his knees, breathing through his nose, the way men breathe when they're trying to keep the shape of themselves intact. "Okay," he said. His voice was rough on it. Maisie was looking at Brutus. The dog was no longer watching the bay doors. He had turned at some point in the last few minutes and was facing the back corner where they sat, facing them. His big body settled and his breathing slow, his amber eyes moving between Walt and Maisie and back with the quiet attention of something that has decided its job is this specific collection of people, in this specific corner, and nothing beyond it requires its concern right now. Maisie put both arms around the dog's neck. He let her. He did more than let her. He leaned into it, the full weight of him, and made that sound, the one without a name. And Maisie pressed her face into his fur and held on and did not make any sound at all. Walt put his hand on her back, just rested it there. Ronan looked at the 3 of them for a moment. Then he stood up and walked back out into the garage. The agents were inside now, moving with the efficient, low-conversation energy of a team executing a plan they've rehearsed. 2 of them had found the corner with the workbench and had set up something with a laptop. Others were on phones. The woman from the AG's office was at the bay door entrance talking to a man with a radio, her voice too low to carry. Cord appeared beside Ronan. "Crane," Cord said. "They're moving on him tonight. The timeline compressed." "Because of us." "Because of the leak, and because of us," Ronan said. "We forced the hand." Cord looked at the agents in the garage, at the federal presence that had replaced the night's danger so quickly that the transition still felt incomplete, like a weather change that happened between one breath and the next. "What do we do now?" he said. "Nothing," Ronan said, "for the first time tonight." Cord almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely there. Reyes wants to know about the Harlan run. Oh, tell him 2 days. He's going to say that's not enough time. He's right, Ronan said. Tell him anyway. The woman came to him. Her coat was dry now, inside the garage, and she looked at him with the face of someone who has arrived at the conclusion of a thing they've been working toward for a long time and finds it looks different up close than it did from a distance. Victor Crane was taken into custody 40 minutes ago, she said, at a property in the eastern part of the state. We moved on the leak simultaneously. Internal Affairs has been in position since 11. She paused. The court order Karen Phelps obtained tonight has been suspended pending a review of her connections to Crane and Furrow. She's been asked not to leave her county. Asked, Ronan said. Strongly asked, she said, with people parked outside her house to support the asking. He looked at her. The sealed testimony. It's still sealed, she said. That's a separate process. But a judge who is not connected to Crane's network has been briefed on the situation and has issued a temporary order placing Maisie Rowan in Walter Rowan's custody pending a full review. She met his eyes. That review is going to take months. It's not going to be clean or fast, but she's not going back to Garrick Falls. Ronan stood with that for a moment. There's something else, the woman said. She said it carefully, in the way of someone who has rehearsed the phrasing. Tyler Phelps. The statements Maisie has made about his conduct, to you, presumably to her grandfather, those constitute a report, which means there's an investigation that opens separately from the Crane matter. She paused. She's going to have to talk to people, professionals who are trained for it. It's going to be hard. She's already done hard, Ronan said. Yes, the woman agreed quietly. She has. She went back to her people. Ronan walked out through the bay doors into the rain. It had eased in the last hour, not stopped, but lost its urgency, dropped from the driving October weight of it to something softer and more resigned, the rain of a storm that has made its point and is now just present. The gravel lot was wet, and the pole light threw its inadequate circle on the puddles, and the federal vehicles sat in a row with their running lights on, red and white reflections in the standing water. Bishop was outside already, standing at the edge of the lot, a cigarette going. He didn't say anything when Ronan came out. He offered the cigarette, and Ronan took it and drew once and handed it back. You doing okay? Bishop said. Ronan looked at the sky, at the clouds that were low and dark and moving. Ask me in a week, he said. I'm asking now. Ronan was quiet for a moment. He thought about the Crow's Rest and the neon sign and the sound of 14 engines dying in the parking lot. He thought about a girl in a yellow raincoat walking toward the one thing in the room that everyone else was moving away from, and the dog putting his head down, and the whole room holding its breath. I don't know, he said, which was honest. Bishop smoked. Brutus, Bishop said. Yeah. 4 years. Yeah. And she walks in and he just... Bishop shook his head once, slowly, not theatrically. The head shake of a man confronting something that doesn't fit the categories he's built his understanding around. She told me something, Ronan said. In the car. She said when you've got nightmares, you can tell who else does. He looked at the standing water in the lot. She said it's like you can smell it. Bishop was quiet for a while. Kid's something, he said finally. Yeah, Ronan said. She is. They stood in the rain until the cigarette was gone. Inside, Maisie had come out of the back corner and was sitting on the Civic's front bumper with Brutus on the concrete between her feet. An agent, young, a woman with the particular gentleness of someone who had been specifically trained for this moment, was crouched in front of her, talking at eye level, her voice low and unhurried. Maisie was listening with that patient attention of hers, not performing engagement, actually listening. Walt was on the metal stool near the workbench. He had his coffee. Someone had produced coffee at some point, it appeared, the federal government apparently traveling with a thermos. And he held it in both hands and watched his granddaughter from across the garage with an expression that Ronan had no word for and didn't try to find one. Ronan sat on the concrete floor next to Brutus. The dog looked at him, those amber eyes, level and still. Ronan put his hand on the dog's back, not the careful, negotiated contact of 4 years, not the approach with the back of the hand extended, the wait for permission, the readiness to withdraw. Just his hand, placed on the dog's back, between the shoulder blades where the scars were thin under the coat. Brutus did not move, did not stiffen, did not do any of the things his 4-year history suggested he should do. He exhaled, long and slow, and his body under Ronan's hand settled by a fraction, the releasing of something very old and very specific, the physical grammar of a creature that has been waiting for a moment to be exactly this, here, without the vigilance, and has finally been given it. Maisie was watching them. The young agent had finished talking and had moved away to give space, and Maisie sat on the bumper and looked at Ronan's hand on Brutus's back with an expression that was the first unguarded thing Ronan had seen on her face all night. Not the patient steadiness, not the careful calm, something younger than both of those. Something that was just a child watching a good thing happen and feeling the simple, uncomplicated weight of it. "He likes that," she said. "Yeah," Ronan said. "I'm getting that. He always liked that, the space between the shoulders." She paused. "I used to sit with him for an hour sometimes, just doing that." Her voice was very quiet. "I didn't think I'd ever see him again." Ronan looked at the dog and then at the girl. "He didn't think so either," he said. She looked at Brutus for a long moment. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Are you going to keep him?" The question sat in the oil-smelling air of the garage with the simplicity of something that has always been exactly this shape, and Ronan looked at the dog, at the amber eyes, at the weight of the big body under his hand, at the 4 years of careful distance that had been bridged tonight by a child in a yellow raincoat who had simply decided that the distance was optional, and the answer was not complicated. "Yes," he said. She nodded once, satisfied. The nod of someone who has confirmed a thing they already knew but needed to hear stated plainly. "Okay," she said. They left the garage at 5:40 in the morning. The rain had stopped completely by then, gone off to whatever it was going to do somewhere else, and the sky in the east had begun the first tentative gray of a dawn that was not yet ready to commit to itself, but was doing the preliminary work. The air smelled of wet asphalt and cold grass, and the last of autumn before it became something harder. The federal vehicles had gone before 4, taking with them the machinery of their operation and leaving behind a business card and a reference number, and the particular vacancy that institutional presence leaves when it withdraws. The young agent had given Maisie her direct number written on a piece of notepad paper and had held Maisie's hand for a moment and said something that Ronan was not close enough to hear, and Maisie had listened and nodded and put the paper carefully into the pocket of her yellow raincoat. The Covenant loaded up. It was not a production. 14 men in their machines, wet cuts and road-worn boots, and the specific exhaustion of a night that had started in one place and arrived somewhere entirely different. They moved through the lot with the quiet efficiency of people doing a thing they had done many times, and the engines started one by one, and the sound of them, that deep, layered, unmistakable thunder of Harleys waking up, came up from the lot and moved through the cold morning air and filled the space around the garage. Walt had the Civic running. Maisie was in the back seat. Brutus was beside her in what was clearly his seat now, and the temporariness of that arrangement had quietly ceased to be temporary somewhere in the last 8 hours, and everyone who needed to know that knew it. Ronan came to the driver's window. Walt looked at him through the glass. He had aged in the night, not dramatically, not in any way that someone who hadn't watched it happen would notice, but Ronan had watched it happen, and he could see the additional weight that a night of carrying a certain kind of fear deposits when it finally puts itself down. He looked like a man who had been holding a wall up by hand for a very long time and had been allowed to step back, and the relief of it was indistinguishable from exhaustion. He rolled the window down. "Harlan County," Ronan said. "You've got a clear run." "I know," Walt said. "The review process," Ronan started. "The woman gave me the numbers," Walt said. "I've got it." He paused. "You've done more than—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. The thing he wanted to say was too large for the window between them, and he knew it and didn't try to force it through. "Thank you," he said. Just that. The 2 words that were entirely inadequate and entirely sufficient at the same time. Ronan said nothing. He stepped back. The Civic pulled from the lot. Walt's careful driving, the rear lights going red as it reached the road and then turning, heading north. and through the back window Ronan could see the shape of Maisie in the back seat, and the bulk of Brutus beside her, and the last thing he saw before the car rounded the curve and the tree line took it was a small hand pressed flat against the rear window, palm out, the way she'd raised it from the rest stop lot. Not a wave. Just an acknowledgement. Just the gesture of someone marking a moment she intends to carry. He stood in the lot and watched until the road was empty. Cord pulled his bike up beside him, idling. The exhaust was visible in the cold morning air, small white clouds of it rising and dispersing. "We good?" Cord said. "We're good," Ronan said. He walked to his bike. He put his leg over and settled into the seat and felt the familiar weight of the machine under him, the specific, grounded gravity of it. The way riding had always been the thing that made the world feel navigable. Not safer, not simpler, just navigable. The road giving the kind of forward motion that thoughts alone couldn't produce. He looked at the garage, at the bay doors they'd left down, at the gravel lot with its puddles and its pole light and the marks where the federal vehicles had stood. He looked at the road. He started the engine. The Covenant formed up around him, so not with instruction, not with direction, just the natural assembly of men who have spent long enough together that together is a posture as much as a choice. And they pulled from the lot onto the road, and the sound of them rose into the cold October morning, and the highway opened up, and they rode. The sky kept lightening ahead of them, that slow, unglamorous brightening that turns black to gray to the pale, colorless white of early morning before the sun commits. They passed through Millrace and through the junction where Walt had turned and through the town of Dalton Creek where the rest stop sat empty in the morning stillness. They rode past a diner, not the Crow's Rest, a different one, but the same genus of place, the same buzzing sign and warm windows and the smell of coffee that reached the road. And Reyes, in the formation, made the slowing signal, and they turned in. It was the kind of place that was open at 6, because it had always been open at 6, and had not yet seen a reason to change this. The woman behind the counter had the specific morning shift energy of someone who has made peace with the hour. Not cheerful, not resentful, just present, filling coffee before she was asked, moving through the space with the economy of someone who knows exactly where everything is and has stopped wasting motion on anything else. They took up the long booth and 2 tables. They ordered without discussion. The quiet, abbreviated ordering of people too tired for deliberation, everyone defaulting to the same thing, coffee and eggs and whatever was hot. The woman filled cups without being asked. Ronan sat at the end of the long booth with his coffee in both hands. Reyes was across from him. The unhappiness was still technically on the record, but it had aged in the night into something that looked less like unhappiness and more like the expression a man wears when he has done a thing he didn't plan to do and found that he cannot, in honesty, say he regrets it. "Decker's going to call," Reyes said. "I know. We've got the Harlan run Friday." "I know. And Bishop needs to get back for the thing with Reyes," Ronan said. Reyes looked at him. 10 minutes, Ronan said. "Before any of that, 10 minutes. Reyes looked at his coffee. Then he picked it up and drank it and said nothing for the remainder of the 10 minutes, which was the most complete form of agreement he was capable of producing, and Ronan knew it and accepted it for what it was. Around the table, the Covenant drank their coffee and let the heat back into their hands and said very little to each other, because very little needed to be said, because they had done what they'd done, and it was done. And the morning was what the morning was, pale and cold and real and here, the way mornings always are, on the other side of the nights that test what you're made of. Ronan wrapped both hands around his mug. He thought about Brutus in the back seat of a gray Civic heading north, pressed against a girl in a yellow raincoat, the dog's breathing finally long and even and unguarded in the way it had never been in 4 years of being his. He thought about the space between the shoulder blades where the scars were thin, and his own hand placed there without the negotiation, and the exhale that had come from somewhere so deep in the animal that it had probably been building since before Ronan had ever known him. He thought about a 6-year-old girl sitting in a pen with a dog that everyone else had written off, talking to him, telling him her name, telling him what her mother's laugh sounded like, keeping something alive in him through the specific and unremarkable act of simply being present and honest. He thought about what it cost to do that, to walk toward the thing that was frightening because you understood it was not mean, It was scared. And the difference between those two things was the whole distance between the life you had and the life that was still possible. He had spent a long time, he understood now, in the confusion between those two things as applied to himself, spending the difference between scared and mean on men who didn't know which one he was either and weren't looking carefully enough to tell. Maisie had looked carefully enough. At the dog. At him. At the thing that was under the surface of both of them. He drank his coffee. Outside the diner windows, the highway ran east and west in the pale morning light, and the sky had committed finally, turning the slow, unheroic gold of a sun that rose because it always rose, regardless of what the night had been. And in the parking lot, the 14 Harleys sat in a row, with their chrome catching the first of it, and the morning smelled of coffee and cold air and the clean absence of rain. Bishop said something low to Cord. Cord said something back. Someone laughed, a small, tired sound, genuine, the laugh of a man rediscovering that he is capable of it. The woman refilled coffee without being asked. Ronan set his mug down. He did not feel healed. He was not under the impression that one night, however it had been shaped, resolved the specific inventory of damage he carried, because damage of that particular vintage did not resolve on a timeline that fit inside a single story. What he felt was something quieter and more modest than healed, and more durable. He felt like a man who had been shown, by a 7-year-old girl in a roadside diner, that the distance between where he was and where something better might be was not as absolute as he had been treating it. That was enough. That was for this morning precisely and completely enough. He picked up his coffee. Around the table, the Iron Covenant sat in the early light and drank what was hot and said the things that people say when the long dark part is over, and they are still, against the reasonable odds of the night, here, still breathing, the engines cooling in the lot outside, the road ahead of them, the morning doing what mornings do. They stayed until the coffee was gone and the plates were cleared, and the woman behind the counter had been tipped in a way that made her look at the table twice when they were filing out. And then they went into the morning and started the engines one by one, and the sound of it rose and filled the lot and moved out onto the highway, and they rode south under a sky that had committed to its color now, a cold and actual blue, and the road was wet and the air was clean, and the world was what it always was on the far side of the hardest nights. Not changed, not repaired, but navigable. The painted center line running straight and the engines running deep, and the men who rode them carrying what they'd always carried, plus one thing more.